Welcome to this meeting of the Milton Planning Board. This is our 6th meeting of fiscal year 18. I'm Alex Whiteside, the chairman. Why don't the people at the table introduce themselves?
April Lamoureux, member.
Julia Getman, clerk.
William Clark, planning director.
Laura Messier, assistant town planner.
Denise Swinson, member.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
Okay, so we're going to go right into a discussion with the building inspector and the town administrator. And probably what prompted this was a situation off Brush Hill Road at a condominium development named Brushwood, or the mansions at Brush Hill. And what happened up there is that we wrote an opinion, and it was supposed to be some meticulous tree preservation, and the meticulous tree preservation definitely did not happen. Stormwater management seems to have not been effectively handled, and the board was concerned that enforcement of its decision was inadequate. And the town administrator has suggested that we should get together with the enforcement people and make sure that we're on the same page going forward. So, Mike, welcome.
Thank you for having this meeting, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you. Yeah, so this issue has been looming over the town for what seems like quite some time. I've been working with Joe Krondak and his group, as well as the town planner and their group. Obviously, there's a breakdown in the process. I think we're here tonight to go forward and come up with a more defined process of who owns what and when. Ultimately, we can't forget what has taken place. Obviously, there was some things that could have been done better. There is some explanation that the building inspector would like to elaborate on with respect to that. But I think the overall consensus from where we sit is that, and I won't steal Joe's thunder with his speech, is that just that there is a breakdown. We would like to come to a working process with this board and with the help of the town planner and the building inspector, so that these special permits are written in such a way that it's a little easier for the building inspector to translate, and then the compliance and enforcement that goes with them. We have a series of checklists, if you will, to enable us to follow more steadfast boxes as we take our way through these special permits. Joe, I know you had something that you would put together today.
I did. For the record, Joe Krondak, Building Commissioner, Chairman and members of the board, thank you for having us. Some of you know, and unlike Mr. Dennehy, public presentation isn't exactly my forte, so I have a little bit of a prepared statement, which is really just a collection of some jumbled thoughts on this matter that I'd like to read to open up the discussion, if that's okay. The existing administration and enforcement procedure for special permits, subdivision, site plan approvals, basically is a conglomeration of blurred lines. This is a procedure that's been in place since time began. Was not created nor altered in any way by the building inspector or the planning director. We can research any of the records on any permits that were granted. And we'll find only minimal detail. There's no as-built, there's no checklist, there's no sign-off cards, there's no reports. This is how it's always been, and this is what we've inherited. We try every day to work this system as best we can, and up until now has seemed to work fairly well. But at the same time, we recognize that this was in fact a recipe for disaster. The most recent events, primarily at 333 Brush Hill Road, have revealed some of the glaring defects in the system. So along with the need for a complete overhaul, that overhaul needs to address every aspect of the process, from the granting of the permit down through its administration and enforcement. So I think that we need to sit with all the stakeholders here, the planning board, planning director, building commissioner, public works and engineering, Conservation Commission, Fire Department, and others, to make sure that these various approvals are concise and enforceable, and that the various departments have the resources to accomplish the intended goals. This can and should be done, but needs to be done carefully and methodically to achieve the best result. I would suggest the forming of a small task force with one representative from each entity, and within the scope of a few well-planned meetings, we can accomplish this goal. So any construction project has the potential to fail and fail badly. Fortunately, most do not, but no one can predict which one will. In the case of 333 Brush Hill Road, at the outset, all of the cards seemed to line up. We had a well-established condominium development seeking to expand their assets in an effort to bolster their ability and maintain their property in a manner consistent with the intended design of that initial development. The condo association applied for and was granted permission through a special permit to build 3 additional units. They subsequently conveyed the rights to build those units to a developer who was subsequently granted site plan approval. I have to believe that the association and the developer initially had a cooperative and cordial agreement. It is clear now that that relationship has soured. So yes, trees have been cut down, drainage problems in the neighborhood have exacerbated, at least, and we have had a rather unprecedented rainy season this year, unlike I've ever seen. And we have the attorney for the association, Mr. Udy, comes to the town seeking enforcement of the special permit and even claiming to, grave incompetencies on the part of the town to do so, to enforce. I think it's important here, before we lay the entire blame of failure on the town and its departments, that the board gain an understanding of what happened to the relationship between the condo association and the developer. What's the root cause of their failed relationship? What's the nature of the disposition of the pending lawsuit or lawsuits right now? And we know these exist. Bill and I were both subpoenaed to a part of that. And what contingencies, if any, did they have in place when they entered into this agreement? Or did they simply rely on, the town to protect all of their interests? So the special permit to build the 3 units was granted to the association. The site plan approval was granted to the developer, with the proviso in the site plan approval that it is, in fact, a part of the special permit. So both parties are responsible for ensuring compliance here. For whatever reason, should the developer disappear, for lack of a better term, then the entire responsibility of achieving compliance will fall back on the condominium association. So I think it's important for the board to have an understanding of that in moving forward. And so, having said that, in my prepared statement, we're here tonight to listen and work together toward a solution.
Right, you suggest a task force with one person from each entity, and each entity being the planning board, the building commissioner, the town administrator, and the town planner is what?
Town planner, Public Works, Fire Department, Conservation Commission. Because all of these have to play a role in this, and it's important. One of the things, I could have a list of things that I think the planning board should do, for example, and I'm sure the planning board has a list of things that the building inspector should do, and I think we should, in another forum, I think we should iron all of those out and come to a solution here. But I really think it's important that the planning board understand the resources of each department and where do we draw draw the line? Where do we put the responsibility on a particular department to do something, and where do we delegate that to a third party? And I think that's really an important piece moving forward.
Well, as you know, in Pulte, we've got 80 pages of material. And the reason we have 80 pages is that the planning board felt it important to touch all the bases. But 80 pages is a lot of material.
Right. Which I have not seen yet.
You haven't seen the Pulte permit?
Not the final decision. I haven't had the time to read it yet.
Well, it's going to take some time to read it.
Absolutely.
And especially to read it so that you have a working knowledge of it. So it would be good if something like the Pulte permit had a checklist of things that need to be done.
Right.
And when they need to be done.
Sure.
And you were suggesting that maybe the task force could do that?
No, I'm suggesting that the task force lay out the procedure so that in the end we end up with a concise special permit. One of the issues I see with the special permits when they come to me is that there's a significant amount of language on how you arrived at a particular conclusion, and then a condition, and then several more paragraphs about how, an explanation of how things were arrived at. So in order to see all of the conditions, you have to read through the entire permit, as opposed to having a concise list at the end, for example. Okay, here are all the conditions, and that will make it clearer for the entities within the town. It'll also make it clearer for the developers and the stakeholders from that side. But I'm not saying that this is definitely how it should be. I'm saying this is something that we should work out in another format.
So I think that there's probably capacity for us to look at the format of our special permits and think about as a group whether it's the most concise document or there's some other way to go about it. But I don't know what the planning board can do to tell you and Bill and the fire department and the town engineer how to work together.
We can and will work that out, and that's part of what we're here to do, to improve the process that exists, because the existing process is certainly lacking, and we know that.
So I agree. I guess I'm just saying, I don't know. I mean, I do this for a living, right? So with a lot of cities and towns.
Sure.
But so I have a different perspective. But I don't, so I'm sort of unclear on why the planning board would need to be a part of the town departments working together to figure out how to manage the flow of information.
No, what I'm saying is, I think what I'm saying is an initial task force, a couple of meetings with all of us, and let's talk about the writing of the special permit and granting of that, and then what happens after that. So we understand, you understand what we need the document to say, we understand what you're saying better in the document.
Okay.
And
can you
to
give us some
help-
examples or an example from the 333 permit that was unclear? Other than the format or be too much wording. Was there anything specific in there that, I know there was a question at our last meeting.
I can, for example, I can, the word clear cutting. Absolutely an unclear and vague term from an enforcement point of view. We have the term no clear cutting, and we have a plan that says protect these trees, these certain trees. So the clearer document to me was protect these certain trees. And I know that the question did come up about how, so I went out at one point and I counted the trees. I looked at the plan. So just to be clear on that point, I took the plan, I went to the site, and I very methodically walked clockwise with Larry Nevin around that site and counted the tree for tree on the plan and compared, which one was there and which one was not there. So when I sent to Alex and Bill my quote-unquote inventory of the trees and which ones that were designated to be protected had been torn down or cut down. That was an actual site visit. It wasn't. I didn't do it from GIS. I don't use that. I actually went there. So, clear cutting to me is cut down all the trees, and that did not happen. So that's something that was unclear.
Okay. What about the provision that there needed to be a filing? Was it a tree protection plan was supposed to be filed before a construction permit was granted?
So I can address that. As I said, we work in an established process that's very, very blurred. And quite frankly, what happened here is I thought Bill was doing a lot of this stuff. Bill thought I was doing a lot of this stuff. We both thought Public Works was doing some of this. And that's where our system has fallen apart. But that is the way it's been. That is what we inherited.
So I think we know that it's pretty clear because this is one of 3 projects that we have now that are in the situation where the filings weren't made. So I guess my only feedback is, whatever you guys need from me, I'm happy to help you. I do this all the time with cities and towns. I'll give you as much free assistance as I can. My point is, I think this is more of a management situation. I mean, I already gave Lauren a book of best practices on local permitting. Happy to walk you through it. That's not going to help making sure that people collect the documents they're supposed to collect. I don't know who the right person is for that. If you want to set up a task force, I'm happy to volunteer for it, but I don't know. I'm still kind of confused because I'm not sure that the way that we write our special permit is going to, I mean, we could change that 6 ways to Sunday, but if it says you have to make a filing and people don't know who's collecting it, that's not our issue.
Right. Well, a special permit that's a little more fresh in my mind because I've just recently reviewed it is the Wentworth Farms permit. The Wentworth Farms permit delegates a lot of the exact issues that are a problem at 333, the drainage and the tree management, to the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission doesn't have an enforcement agent. They simply don't. They've gotten one approved as a part-time position. They haven't had one for years. They've gotten one approved as a part-time position, but the way it was approved in the level of salary it was approved at, they couldn't fill it. So we don't know when it's going to be filled. So what do we do when we're faced with that situation? Should this project go south? Who is responsible for that? If it's delegated to the Conservation Commission, it says so right in the special permit. Mm-hmm. So perhaps one of the things that can happen, and I think this happens in other towns. I did work in Quincy for a number of years. I know this did happen. The special permit could be written in draft form and then submitted to the various departments for comment. So they would at least have the opportunity to say, I don't have the resources to do this. Let's put this part under a third party. Or, yes, I do have the resources to do this. And they're made aware ahead of time, before it even gets issued. Okay, this is coming. Let's provide for this. Because every one of us, I work right across the hall from Bill and Lauren. And we're 90 miles an hour every day. We've got, between the two of us, we've got more balls in the air. I think, one of us should get the award for best juggler. And that's just the nature of town government. So there's, and that's likely true of every department. So they need advance warning of what's coming. They need to have input on what tasks they're being delegated. Because some of it they may not be able to do. So there's a host, that's just a few things we're touching on off the top of our heads, but I think if we were to sit down and try and review the whole process, and maybe we'll come to that conclusion that, no, everything's okay at the planning board side and it all needs to come on this end, but I think the meeting has to happen. If we want to make an improvement, I think we have to look at the whole process.
So just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there's no room for improvement in our process. Mm-hmm. I think what I'm suggesting is maybe a task force of town government folks that are the people that do this every day might be a better starting point, but I'm happy to participate in whatever way our chair deems is appropriate.
I gather that you have a lot on your plate. Bill has a lot on his plate. I know the town meeting just approved one more person to help you, and I know construction levels have been very high. Just plain old remodels and new houses. But we have Wentworth Farms coming, we have Carberry, we have the Pulte project, and so on. Do you foresee a need for another inspector just to deal with those?
I could always use more help. I don't foresee the possibility of getting another inspector. I don't foresee that at all.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something we should all be thinking about.
But what I am anticipating, we do have a zoning code enforcement officer that's been approved and about to be filled. Actually, I have a starting date of October 10th for a new person. That's a full-time position. That's going to clean up a lot of our outstanding blight violations. And eventually, once we come back to par on that, I expect that person to be able to assist in the specific enforcement and administration of these permits. That's one of the goals. It's going to be a little bit before I get there with that person, but that is absolutely one of the goals.
So from my understanding of the project now, and I think this understanding would be helpful for you as you're thinking about the process too, is, who's responsible for making sure that the construction management plan, the tree management plan, the stormwater management plan, landscape plan is in place before the building permit is issued? Does that fall on your plate, or
That
falls on your plate?
can and will fall on my plate.
Okay. And then once the permit is issued and the activity starts, does all enforcement fall on your department to ensure that?
Ultimately, yes. To go back to another issue of clarity, there can be some uniformity in the decisions. As I recall back to the Pleasant Street development, Joe Kathleen Lane, the Woodmere development, a couple of the others, I don't know the exact specifics, but each of those addressed in the construction management plan start times of construction. All of them were different. They shouldn't be. There's a number of conditions that you guys can impose that should be just boilerplate. They should all be the same, so we don't have to look for those.
So what happens in that situation where there's inconsistencies? What do? You just pick
We
one?
have to go to each, if somebody calls and complains, Jill Kathleen is starting at 7 o'clock. We have to pull out the permit, go through, figure out what time they're allowed to start, and find out whether or not they're in violation. Then if somebody calls and complains about Woodmere, and they say that Woodmere is starting at 6:30, we have to go and pull out their document. And maybe, if we're lucky this time, the town meeting will pass the noise ordinance, and planning board can simply refer to the noise ordinance instead of having a separate one for each project. There's lots of little things that add up to solid, concise enforcement administration of these permits.
Thank you for
Which of you wants to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay, could I just finish? I just had two left. If a modification to any of those plans is sought by the developer, how do you address that? How do you deal with
We
it?
just addressed that with Woodmere because they, and again, we had to go and look.
Yeah.
In fact, it was one of my inspectors that, in talking with the site supervisor, they said that they were going to take the two-story units, and they found that it was better if they had them as a one-story unit. So I pulled out the special permit, and the special permit specifically said there shall be one bedroom on the first floor and one or two bedrooms on the second floor. So for them to eliminate the second floor, that was a deviation from the special permit. So I referred it to Bill. I think they're coming tonight.
No. October 12th.
October 12th, to seek a remedy of that, or a revision to the special permit.
So when a developer seeks a modification from something that's been already issued by the planning board, you do send it back to the planning board?
Correct.
Now,
But the potential to miss something like that is high, unless there is a clear and concise list.
yeah, okay. And if you look at a management plan and there's room for interpretation, what do you do in a case like that?
You interpret. It depends on the circumstance. It depends on what are we looking at.
Yeah.
Really hard to answer without a specific
I
example.
know, I don't have a good example for you, but I would like to increase the conversation between yourself and our board and help you feel free enough to ask the chair, to just shoot him an email and say, you know, the developer would love to look at it this way. I imagine the town would love to look at it this way. What were you intending? Or what is it that you want to see here? Because we want to get rid of the vagaries, and I think your idea of coming up with boilerplates would be good. It would be a good direction to go in.
Sure.
But in the meantime, it would be really great if you felt comfortable enough to come to us or the chair and just say, I just want to clear up something that's a little confusing, because I don't want to go the wrong way.
I do. I don't have a fear of that, I guess. I see Alex all the time. He's in the building all the time. I think if I had that situation, if I came across it, I wouldn't hesitate to come to the board either directly through Alex or through Bill to the board.
Super, super. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. And I did have one last question, and that is there a way for, I'm the newest one to the board, so people might know, is there a way for me to look up a building permit, just to go online somewhere and look up
Yes.
a building permit? Okay.
Yes.
I'd love to get those instructions, and is that something that's shared with the public?
Yeah, it's right on our webpage. So
Okay.
if you go to our webpage, and I don't probably know it as well as I should, but there is a link there that says View Issued Permits.
Great.
And it's a searchable database in our online permitting system. Takes a little, you got to play around with it a little bit to get to the information, but once you do it, then you know how to do it.
Right. Thank you for
And we're
coming.
always available. If you can't figure it out, just call us, one of the secretaries will walk you through the process.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay?
I think that what Joe has suggested about task force is a good idea, because I do think it would be easier even for us. This construction noise is a great example. I know we get to a special permit and we say, what did we do on that last one? And it would be great if we had a list and we said, here are all the topics that we thus far in special permits in the last 5 years have addressed. And have that list be our starting point to say, is this topic a topic that should be addressed in this particular special permit? And then we say yes or no. And then we go through that checklist and then we say, how have we handled that particular issue, like the hours, in the past? How have we handled the number of requests for waivers? Have we had 10 requests for width of road waivers and granted 10, or have we had 10 and granted 5? Because I personally think that would be useful to all of us in making decisions. And when we review the language of the special permit, some of it sometimes is very legal language. And I know as a practitioner, sometimes legal language, when you're trying to interpret it to figure out how it actually translates to something that you're going to put in the ground, there is room for interpretation. And so I do think the clearer we can be, the better chance we have of the enforcement going more smoothly. So I would just like to endorse that idea of really taking a look at how we write the special permits so that they can be more user-friendly.
Thank you for coming in. It's been helpful.
Pleasure to be
get
here.
some of the background. I just want to sort of echo, I think, what a little bit of what April was trying to say, which is I think this board is very willing to participate in a process to make the whole system better, our side and your side as well. But I do think that the yeoman's part of that work needs to fall to all of you. We've got Mike Dennehy now is a strong town administrator. You and Bill have a tremendous amount of experience with this town, and then prior to that, and we've got youthful enthusiasm, hopefully, in Lauren. I think that, you know, this board, we have a problem. We've all identified it, we've all recognized it, and now we have to solve it, and we have to solve it fast, because to Denny's point, there's a lot coming fast, and it's big stuff. And if we rely on this board to get it done, we only meet every other week, and it's going to take forever. So to the extent that you all can sort of prioritize this as an urgent situation so that this board can continue to do its work, I think we're happy to participate in any way we can, but this is a big deal, and it's definitely going to interfere with our ability to issue permits until we have a solution going forward. So, so again, thank you for coming in. Thank you in advance for, you know, taking it on, and I look forward to seeing what April comes up with as the volunteer on that committee.
I had a feeling that was coming.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah.
Just in my 10 months here, and prior to me coming here, I understand the town to be very reactive. The primary position that was pushed for in the override by my predecessor was the code enforcement officer, right? To your point, Denny, I think it will help, right? I've taken many phone calls from people that have been enforced by the building inspector that he does selective and punitive enforcement and inspection in this town. And I've denounced that, telling them that it's a very reactive enforcement, right? They're so busy up there that if they don't hear things, they don't know things, right? I think the addition of this code enforcement officer, which was, if you look at the override, it was put at the top of the positions on the town side because it is paramount to helping this process achieve its goal. I always used to say to my workforce in Boston that a 311 or a customer service line only tells you the things you're not doing correctly. And let's agree, 333 Brush Hill has had its problems, but I think that for the most part, the developments in this town, everybody complies. There is an enforcement piece to it, but this code enforcement officer will not solve everything. I think what we're doing here tonight and the constructive criticism we will take as an administration, use that to build a better product. But I think, to Joe's point, putting together a group of people, I know there was a group down at Public Works today working on one of the developments, and the new DPW director said to me that this was just a different way of doing business that he's normally seen, because the special permit applicant came to them looking for some clarification on an issue, and it needs to be funneled in the right direction. And I think what I'm trying to say is this highlights the need to oil that squeaky gate, but I think there will be improvement once we get this code enforcement officer up and running. There is a learning curve involved with that, but it will allow Joe's operation to be a lot more proactive and do some inspection and enforcement, so that the compliance which is on the developer takes place and is adhered to, and we'll straighten out who owns what and when they iron out that stuff. But that's my 2 cents, and this is a good step in the right direction. I appreciate you calling this meeting tonight, and I think we will see a much better product with all of those big developments that are coming and so important to our town.
Now, one thing that I think that we should mention is that the developer at Brushwood, Pat McKenna, said, "Oh, I just did, everything I did was approved by either Bill or you."
Of course he said that.
Exactly. But I'm just asking, was he there every day asking, can I do this, can I do that?
He was not. Absolutely not.
Bill? Was he there every day? we have a suggestion for a task force with the fire department, the Concom, the DPW. Who else? The planning board?
And if I may, just to further that a little bit, I would envision 3-4 meetings, and maybe we don't need the fire department or even the planning board at every one, because a lot of it is, down in the trenches, how do we solve that end of it? But yeah, I think it would be helpful if we did have 3 or 4 where all parties were there.
We need to go somewhere from this meeting, and
Yeah.
so this was the suggestion, and of course
So I think maybe...
there are other suggestions as to where we go. We can consider them, but yeah, absent that, the task force.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Can I volunteer Lauren for the planning board, right, as the representative? And I can work with her inside this building Monday to Friday and make sure that, this board doesn't have to meet more often than not, and she can be the baton carrier.
I think it's worth a try. What does the rest of the board think?
I think that's fine, and if April wants to get on the phone with Lauren to pass on some wisdom on her experience, then that probably would be beneficial. But
We've already discussed that, yeah. I think that makes sense. I just think because then you'll have a direct line to her every day.
Yep.
Right.
And she's a party to the process, so she's going to have more insights than I would.
All right, then,
Can I
yeah.
just make one suggestion to Lauren? Lauren, if you, or in a conversation with Joe, can find out what some other communities are doing that helps with the making the transfer of information from the planning board to the, to the enforcement easier, that would help us think about how we can do a better job, then I think that would be valuable too.
Right, absolutely. And I just want to mention that you did ask me to look into this at the last meeting. April sent me a guide about streamlined local permitting, which I did review. I started to look into other communities to see what they were doing, and I did meet with Bill and Joe to talk about this. In light of that discussion and the upcoming discussion that we just had, I thought that it would be helpful to have a larger conversation about that. But I did start the process. I'm happy to continue it, and I'm more than happy to be the go-between between the planning board and the town administrator when necessary and help this process.
I'll just make one comment. I've done some work in Watertown, and they have a convening meeting of the applicant with all of the departments, so DPW, fire, planning, building department, and have a discussion of everybody at the table before they file and before they get going. And then they also have a checklist system. So, and I think Natick does too. So maybe those are 2 communities that you could check out.
Yeah, those are
Boston does
in
that
book.
similarly with the Public Improvement Commission, where there's a member from Boston Water and Sewer, Facilities, Public Works, Transportation, and the permit is not issued until then.
Yeah, a lot of towns do a pre-filing meeting.
So if I just had a couple bullet point ideas for process improvement. I had mentioned this to Mike Dennehy before, but there's an automated email feature that would allow residents who are interested in a project to be able to sign up to receive emails of the agenda as it's posted. So there's like other towns, I think the city of Boston does this. That way, if someone's interested in, Woodmere or name your project, when that shows up on an agenda, that keyword is tagged to the list of emails that people are interested in. So anytime an agenda is posted or updated, they get the automated agenda, and that's a way to keep them in the loop. And then we had talked in a different meeting, I think it was Brian that brought up notice to abutters with proof of receipt. I don't know if we ever voted on that or if we should vote on that, but I think that's something that we should definitely implement. And then, are we working from a certified list of abutters? How?
Yes.
Certified, okay. So that would obviously be one of the boxes that gets checked. And then in addition to that, it would be great if we could give notice to the neighborhood association as well. and I wanted to understand which newspapers are we using for legal notification? Do we just use the Milton Times? Yeah, we just use the Milton Times? Okay. So, did you want to make a?
On the certified letters, I was stunned that we don't use certified letters, not because I just didn't know we didn't. So I really want to back up that just feels like a huge liability for us to not have that if we have people making allegations that they didn't get notice. Those little green tickets are all you need to sort of say, yes, you did. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because Bill had made a comment raising a legitimate concern about no budget for that. And, speaking as a guy who files a lot of applications, that I pay for it, and I don't even think twice about it. So as you guys are thinking about your checklist, if there are things that feel onerous to the town because of cost, just pass it back to the applicant, because I think it's something that we need to do and we need to protect ourselves with. So I think you should be not too afraid to pass those costs back whenever possible.
So in a situation like that, do we need to vote, or is that just going to be so now? We're just going to, from now on, notification is going to...
I think that's probably Mike Dennehy's call.
I just want to comment briefly, because I administer the Board of Appeals budget, and they obviously do mailings to abutters all the time and never do certified. But we do pass, if you choose to do that, we do pass the cost on to the we pass the cost of the regular mailing on to the applicant. Certified letters now are $5 and something cents a piece, and if you're talking 300 or more,
$6.
$6.
We do pass on the cost of the regular stamp,
Right.
and the developer does pay it. There's no squawk about it.
Look, it protects the developer just as much as it protects the town. And I'd look to I'd question ZBA not doing it. I mean, we've had 3 or 4 people in the last month come up here and say they haven't gotten notice, and we can't defend that. So $7 is pretty cheap when it comes to protecting your permit and protecting our liability.
Well, in many respects, it's when we continue a meeting. In other words, if we continue Brushwood until October 12th, we're not going to send certified letters to people, and then people who aren't here or perhaps won't know, and then they'll say they got no notice. So it's not foolproof.
There are some things.
That green receipt is pretty foolproof as long as we know.
What do you think about, on the table is the modification for Woodmere, and there is I think it's 3 pages of, do you want that to go certified or regular? That's just the modification of 1 building or 2? 1 or 2 buildings that they're going to, instead of putting units on the second floor, the units on the first. That's what the modification is. They're coming back before you to modify their special permit. I still have my 10 days.
Look,
But you don't...
I'm just going to answer it as a developer. As a developer, I want you to send it certified because I want the green tickets. That used to be on our internal checklist at my company. Do we have the green receipts?
Where's the green receipt? Okay.
But you don't send the whole application.
No, you send them a letter.
Just saying that
You
this
just
is
send a
happening.
letter
Yeah,
saying-
so you...
It's a copy of the legal ad that went to the paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We will investigate the automated email feature as well, that catches a keyword that I've received numerous phone calls from people that said, yeah, I got the first one, but the 27th and 8th, I didn't know you were having that meeting. So very recently.
So there's a number of different platforms that I can share with Lauren that could make that a lot easier, just online, so that people can follow a specific project and they can actually weigh in on the project through these different portals.
Yeah, we did it for the Adams Street construction project. I don't know how it's working out. I haven't checked with the town engineer, but that feature is...
It's really great from the neighborhood's perspective, too, because you don't know which board is going to be hearing it. You don't know if it's going to be before the selectmen or Concom or what, and if you could get that email in your inbox, it would be phenomenal and efficient, and I'm sure all the committees would love that. And then this is just another thing for the checklist, but we really want an arborist, stamped, documented inventory of existing trees prior to any tree removal. And I mean, that's something that we want on any checklist, and we're going to work on our documentation on our end, but that is something we don't want to see happen again. And then within the the construction management and tree management plans, in addition to a bond requirement, I'm wondering if we should add language that states that any changes to this plan require the written consent of the planning board chair or something to that effect, so that any actions taken that deviate from the plan, you know, a fine or something would trigger the developer to get in here and talk to us or remedy the situation, so that we're not in that situation that we found ourselves in with 333, where we kind of felt powerless.
Yeah, I'd look to best practice on that. We don't want them in here for every, 6-inch adjustment on a building foundation or something. That's administrative, I think, legitimately, but I'm sure there's some best practice in what Lauren's reviewing, and it would be good to hear a proposal on that as just for what that sort of
Yeah, I think
is considered substantive.
I just want to point out that we had, was it Quistit Brook that came in and said that they had to come to us for like some really, really minor things because that was written into their, the decks, I think it was, and we actually voted to make it less, that they didn't have to come in. So that was like 30 or 40 years ago. So we have to remember that these documents live on for a very long time, too. And what we hadn't accounted for, or the prior board hadn't accounted for many years ago, is that once it's built out, then the conditions are going to be a little different, right? Mm-hmm. So we might have to think about that, too, in our language, because we're usually thinking about while it's getting built out, and not really if they want to make a change 20 years down the road, which I don't know how many years it was for 333 Brush Hill Road, but obviously there was some time in between.
But
so
you
it's
know
a
what
balance.
I'm trying to protect ourselves from, because there were so many instances where they weren't following the plan, then they were looking for wires, and they were, it just kept and nothing compelled them to come to us. And I just want something in there to not let that happen again. So I'm searching for a way, but anyway.
Could just I can't say enough for the bond or some other type of monetary tie, because that will, if they're held to something on a monetary level, that's going to make their desire to comply much greater. If there's no bond, or ransoming of lots, for lack of a better term, I think that's a fantastic way to help ensure compliance. You can't sell this lot until you've shown that you've complied with everything. It's a beautiful tool and technique.
You almost needed something in the middle of the process here. Do you know what I'm saying? And I don't know what that is, but you might think of it when you're working on your list. But those two things that you described are the things that probably saved us in the end, hopefully. But we could have used one more here. So, anyhow, thank you.
Okay. Are we done?
When will we hear back?
I don't know. Lauren is going to, Lauren will give us reports at every meeting.
All right, great.
Lauren, every meeting we want a report.
I can do that.
Thank you.
When is the next meeting, just so I have an...
October 12th.
Every 2 Thursdays, every other Thursday.
Very good.
No,
My suggestion...
Second and fourth.
Second and fourth.
Sometimes there's a fifth.
Oops, sorry.
My last suggestion would be the week in between, have a meeting during town hall hours, interdepartmental, with any developer that needs to vet something for the following Thursday,
That's great.
right?
Yep.
So we'll meet every Thursday, you're not meeting, during the day, with any developer that needs to iron out something with Public Works, Fire Department, Inspectional Services, planner, whatever it might be, so that we know, we're in the know when they come to you the following Thursday.
Good.
Sounds good.
Thanks for coming.
And that's actually really helpful, Mike, because then you can find out if there's conflicts in advice between two departments.
Right.
So getting everybody in there,
and I think-
it's one of the things in the book.
I think nowadays they meet once, then they'll run down to Public Works tomorrow and come up to Fire and make sure that, and that doesn't vet everything properly with everyone else in the room. So
I do think there was an important issue raised by Joe earlier that I'm not quite sure falls into that, all the departments, which is the Conservation Commission, because they have legal jurisdiction, and that issue about enforcement is not something that I was aware of. But where we do have to defer to them in terms of like we did at Wentworth, I would like to understand from them, you know, how the communication, how they view like the communication should work, because I'm sure we're going to have it come up on the Pulte, on the, Pulte, and on the Carberry property, you know, because those have wetlands.
Don't our special permits say that they must comply with Concom?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if they have no enforcement, then how does that
My
actually happen?
point is that, so my question then is if they have to comply with Concom and Concom says they didn't comply with us, can't they then use our enforcement mechanism because our permit says they must comply?
The
Something to
issue,
ask John
Brian, though, I
Flynn.
think at the moment is, they have enforcement abilities. They just don't have an agent.
Officer. Gotcha. Well, so the question is, can we use our agent for the time being? It's just a question for John Flynn. I know you don't want the answer to that to be yes.
They do enforcement. As members of the commission, they do enforcement.
Okay.
If they see something or they hear that there is something, they will, as individual members or as the commission, go to that site, view it, write it up, and have a hearing on it. To think that there's nothing, that they're not doing it, that's just false.
Right, but part of enforcement also is monitoring. And
Right.
I'm not sure they have the capability
They
to do
don't
that.
they're not there constantly monitoring, but they are looking at their order conditions.
I was just thinking that as you think about how to coordinate amongst departments, it's not just departments, it's other commissions that
committees.
have jurisdiction, not just ours.
So I was actually going to suggest maybe Alex should call the chair of the Concom. Have a conversation.
I'm happy, I'll definitely do that.
Okay.
And
Kathy
I'll
Bowen is
report.
our liaison now, and she's a Public Works employee, and she's a wealth of information, so that's someone we could have in the room, in addition to the town manager or any.
That addresses
Until we
what
get the
my
conservation agent.
comment had
Yeah.
to do with, is just to make sure somehow that was in the mix of in the conversation.
All right then. We're going to go on to other matters.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
This is our sixth meeting of fiscal year 18. We're going to meet again on October 12th and October 26th. I'm going to pass around some old minutes, August minutes, for you to take a look at and see if they meet your approval.
Did you incorporate my edits?
We've got the Master Plan Implementation Committee on October 16th. We have a town meeting, it's not a special town meeting, it's a town meeting, or is it a special town? It's a town meeting on October 23rd. Citizen speak, anything that's not on the agenda, we're happy to hear brief comments from residents and citizens who want to speak. Anyone? No one. All right. Now, the A&R at 300 Highland Street, it seems to me we need some more information. Yes.
There's a continuation of the public hearing at 7:15.
We'll get to that.
Get to that, that's fine.
We're going to do a few quick items.
That will be a quick item.
All right, we'll do that after we do this quick item. 300 Highland Street. It seems to me we need to know if the tennis court is a structure. Is it a structure, Bill? Do they have? We'll ask the building commissioner. We need the setback determination It's 80%, 124 feet, to a depth of 112.5 feet into the lot. We need that determination on the plan. We need the distances for the generator and the air conditioner. Those are structures. And we need to know if there's a propane tank.
Okay, I know that the answer to the tennis court is no, it's not a structure.
So you can build it right to the lot line?
They're going to lift the tennis court. When you look at the plot plan,
They're going to light it?
lift it. It's going to be taken
They're going
out.
to take it out?
Yep.
Okay. So that's what we need. I suggest that we consider this matter at our next meeting.
Okay. You want a motion?
Yep.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Now, Mr. Corcoran, you've got something to say.
I do, and the Pattersons are here, who are one of the abutters to the property at 1065 Brush Hill Road, so rather than have them wait longer, we are in active discussion with, I'm representing the Turners. This is a continuation of a preliminary subdivision hearing for 1065 Brush Hill Road and the notion of improving Upper Road relative to creating 2 additional house lots. We are in active discussion with the neighbors about adjusting that plan and arriving at a solution that collectively we'd like to bring back to the board. There are details to be understood, and I need to work out with the fire chief in particular, but I would ask the board to continue the matter to either the 12th or the 26th at the board's pleasure, in order to give us time to see if we can arrive at a solution.
Let's do it till the 26th.
Yeah. So moved.
Second? All right. All in favor?
Is there a time?
Yes? Bill?
I just want to remind you that many of you will be at the town meeting on Monday, the 23rd, so you're meeting on the 26th also.
Yeah.
Just an FYI.
In other words, we might be tired and grouchy.
That's Ned's problem.
Yeah, that's.
It's no different than tonight, actually.
Is there a time certain? I mean, I think we
What
need to
time?
continue to a time.
What time?
Tell me.
7:15.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, we remember how we promised 3 Beechwood Lane would be the first item on our agenda tonight.
That was fast enough, so.
But we didn't keep you waiting until 9:30.
Okay, it's open house today, so that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, I am Quincy Miller, 3 Beechwood Lane. I'm one of the owners up in that development. I did not bring enough copies because I'm never really sure, but I brought 4 copies to hand around of information. At the last meeting, we had decided that we would get a proposal from Maltby and Company regarding the preservation of the beechwood and the sugar and maple tree. We have received that, and I can essentially give you the summary. Maltby said the trees are dying. They're definitively dying, and we asked them what is humanly possible to be able to be done to attempt to save the trees, and this is the proposal that they have put together. And ultimately, he said the only thing you can do is try to preserve them as long as possible, and you can go about that by trying to do these measures, and there's really no way of determining, it could be a year, 3 years. If this all works, you may be lucky and get 10 years, but there's no way to ultimately save them for the long term. They were already very old trees as it was, and with the disturbance, et cetera, we've set that ball in motion is essentially what they have said.
Do they think there was a disturbance?
Well, they said I included in your packet what is the their recommendation on how to avoid tree damage during construction, which we know clearly was not completed. So, they were not there during the construction, but they said this is what, if they were consulted, and which was required by the commission for the tree preservation plan to be created, this is what they would have completed to be done. So that is probably ultimately as much as they could say. Ultimately, the trees were fine, now the trees are dying, and this happened during the construction. So,
Did you have an estimate on the age of the tree? Sorry.
I don't know if I've received a new I'm not sure if it was from Maltby originally or for Arbor Way, but the numbers I've heard for the beechwood is, up to close to 150, 200 years, and the sugar maple was not as old, but, over 100 years old.
An expected lifespan on a tree like that?
Don't know. Again, their point was, it's obviously not a young tree.
Understood.
So, but, would we, if it would have been protected more appropriately, most likely we wouldn't be in this extreme of a situation where, a whole center of the tree died this year, which needs to be removed. And then ultimately what they would do is, the air spade, all the plant health fertilizers, and then every year you just cut back each piece that's dying to, remove any of the dead limbs, and ultimately you'll be left with no tree. So that's, they had recommended, although we have not explored that, they had recommended planting a couple trees now, because these will die at some point, and at least you might as well get them growing. We have not had time to discuss that because I'm not sure where to plant them, given the size of the beechwood tree. It almost has to be gone before you could replace it, because I can't imagine anything's going to grow under that tree. But that's to be, I guess, explored at another time. So that is the information that we've gotten in terms of everything possible to save these trees. So clearly we didn't follow the builder did not follow or create any plan to preserve the trees as was requested by the town, and they weren't also, held throughout the process to ensure that it was done. And so here we are now.
That's sort of the crux of the situation, that we would say we're going to charge your bond this amount. We're going to charge you, Mr. Developer, this amount because you failed to do what you should have done. And that's the only way we can charge them. I mean, if they did everything they should have, and the tree is still dying, then charging them would be more difficult. But saying that there are omissions and that they didn't take steps that they reasonably should have taken, I think gives us the opportunity to charge this developer this $9,000, yeah?
Before we decide to charge them the $9,000, I'd be curious to know what level of mature tree we could get to replace the beech. The beech, I loved that beech tree. It's down the street from my house, but it's pretty much gone by the looks of things. And I hate to see us sort of throw $5,000 at this just to end up in the same place in a year or two, while we have a bond here with this gentleman to see what level of mature, can we get a 20-year-old beech tree? Can we get a 25-year-old beech tree to replace the beech that's there today and give it our all on saving that sugar maple, which at least still has green leaves? So it's just a question I'd ask the board to consider. You're going to say we don't have a bond, but we're holding his money.
We're only holding his money on the road.
We're holding his money. So there's a discussion to be had.
Well, you've got a good point. You've got the lawyers are probably saying, well, we've got great arguments to make here, but we still are holding money, and if they didn't do what they should have done, they are obligated to make it right, and maybe this pot of money isn't the right pot, but maybe they won't get it back if they don't do the right thing.
Yeah, suit, counter-suit kind of thing. So I guess that would be my question, is how old of a tree can we get? How mature of a tree could we get to reestablish the best possible look up there that we can get?
For the same money. I mean,
Yeah, or...
I mean, maybe it's more, but how much, I mean, $5,000 is a lot of dough for a tree.
Yeah, this is $8,300. By the way, the other company who had given us the quote to cut both trees down was essentially the same price. And I think Maltby said, you know, to save it is going to be the same cost to cut them both down and remove them. But I know the community is actually in favor of the same approach that you mentioned, which is, you know, to lose these two historical trees and then plant a 15-foot Charlie Brown tree that will, you know, it will take another 200 years for this thing to grow, or 100 years, doesn't seem to be the most prudent way to handle if the trees do have to come down. So,
Well, I mean, Maltby says that at some point they will. What do you people want to, what do you want to do?
I would, if we were able to attempt to save the trees through this approach and see what happens in the next year while retaining amount of the bond in case it does not work to replace the trees, that would be the ideal situation. You know, I hate to spend the $8,000 and then, to your point, a year or 2 years later, you know, the trees are both completely gone and we're back to the same square one. At the same time, we'd hate to just go and cut them down now for the sake of getting the money to put the mature trees in today. So I think the most prudent approach would be attempt to save the trees by any possible means and then retain some amount of protection for whatever period we deem, whether that's 2 years or 3 years, to determine, or 1 year, whatever it is, to determine what's the professional opinion of, are the trees deteriorating at a faster rate, et cetera.
So what do people think?
How about that approach?
Is that possible? Can you just hold
Well,
the
I mean,
bond?
anything's possible, but that sort of doubles the amount of money the developer is expected to pay. I mean, the developer obviously is going to have we're going to have to invite the developer to join us for a discussion once we determine that this is what we want to do. Also, we will want to establish what they did wrong, because that's important. But
Just to move you forward, what if you split the project, that you take one of the 2 trees down, put in your new trees, larger trees, but you at least now, while you're seeing if the bigger one can last, you've at least got something else growing. I know you have several much smaller trees planted around.
Those trees will have to go. Those were, like, whatever the requirement was that he had to put those 2 little trees in from the town. I mean, they're only about 8 feet tall and a stick skinny tree. So ultimately, those aren't the solution. I guess that could be an option. I think the problem is the tree that's the most gone, that is the least likely to survive, is the beechwood, which is really of the 2 trees, you know, I think everyone is impressed with the sugar maple, but of the 2 trees, the beechwood is the one, I think, of most significance if you had to rate them on a scale. So doing that option, you would say take down the beech tree and put in a new beech tree. But, you know, if you're going to do that and you're going to lose that crown jewel, if you will, you might as well just say you're going to take them both down and put 2 new ones in. It's either worth saving the beech tree, in my opinion, or it's not.
Do we need to bring the developer in?
I think that if we're agreeable to potentially charge the developer, do we think, Bill, that this developer did everything right?
He thinks he did.
What do you think? I mean, do we have anyone who thinks he didn't?
Well, just to be clear, and I didn't bring that document with me, in the plan received by the developer, in the tree management plan, it was very clearly laid out that he had to hire an arborist, that arborist had to create a tree plan, that plan had to be approved by the board, and then he had to take those approaches to retain it.
That should do it.
We were very clear, and I learned in the first meeting that the developer never paid the arborist initially, so the arborist never came out to do the tree plan. So, that was known by the town, at least during the first meeting, which I attended.
All right, I think that's good enough.
I would think so, too.
Let's bring the developer in and suggest that this is what we're going to try.
Wait. The first meeting that you were at, but not the first meeting that, you've only been here, say, 3 months. But he's talking about a plan that should have gone in when Beechwood started.
Right.
So he has no idea if that plan got submitted or not.
Well, did it?
I don't know.
I was just going by, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I think it was you who mentioned that they never paid and they never showed
I
up.
know I said they didn't pay, but
You think he may
I
have
don't know what-
submitted a plan?
I don't know what he submitted for a plan.
So it's prudent to go look. I am going to roll the dice and think I know the answer to that.
We're going to look around also to see if we have anything, because that would do it. But that's what we need. I mean, we need to say, look, Mr. Developer, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, and you're going to have to face the consequences.
So on the enforcement, I think, Lauren, this is a good point. Just like on Woodmere, we can have a tree preservation plan, and they can all be staked. But when site contractors get out there and they move things around, like when I drove through and I took some pictures, and there was piles, very tall piles of dirt. It's like one of the things right here that I knew already, but the soil compaction by putting earth on it. So, the building inspector typically is called out when the building code requires certain types of inspections, right? So I'm wondering, on the planning side, on the zoning side of it, if there should be some regular, review of, is the tree management plan being followed in the interim periods when they're not going out there for building code inspections. So just put that in your sort of thing of how to look at our best practices, because this is, I think, one of the things that is that because of the way the building industry works, this kind of thing happens a lot. This kind of stuff happens a lot. And it just has to do with the way they manage their site. And tight sites can be hard to work on, but they may have to take soil off a site. They may have to figure out where to put their equipment that's not going to be that convenient, or maybe not on site. But that part of the enforcement, I think, needs to be really ongoing, because it can change day to day or week to week in terms of how they're moving stuff around on the site.
And just to be clear, I can definitively tell you, because the tree sits directly in front of my home, there was never a fence, never a stake. Actually, the construction dumpster sat under the tree for almost all of my home's construction, until the point of which they had to finish it and moved it up to the neighbors. So unless the tree management plan was nothing needs to be done, I can tell you that there was never anything to protect that tree in any way.
Okay, I think that, when shall we probably should do this the 26th as well, just to give the developer enough time. Or do you want to do it
My
on
only
the
concern
12th?
with waiting until the 26th is
Okay,
you got
let's
to get
do
the
it.
work done.
Let's do it on the 12th.
Can I just ask a provocative question? So the developer has not completed the road as required. Has anyone actually heard from the developer since he was told that he did not complete the road? And what happens if and when he does not show for the next meeting, would be my question.
Well, you have to understand the bond that he's posted is for the road, and if the town were to want to execute on the bond, it would have to do it in a legal proceeding. I believe there is a legal procedure for executing on the bond for if we want to use that bond for the tree, there's no easily available legal procedure, but the developer wants the money back, I would think.
No, I understand that. I was just wondering if he's even being cooperative about fixing the road at this point, or if he's
No,
missing
I mean,
an
there's
action.
enough money to fix the road in the bond, as long as the certified check is still good. Is it still good?
Yes.
Do we need to take that road?
To what?
Are we accepting that road?
No, private road. I think there is one other legal hook back, and that's your homeowner association, which I don't know that you've signed off.
He has not given,
For him?
we've been trying to get, well, again, we were under the impression we could not accept the road from him until the road was completed. Now, knowing that the road, we've been trying to get him and his attorney together so we could take the road in as a homeowners association, but it still has not been signed over to us. So technically, he still has ownership of it, I guess that's how.
And you've got a lawyer who is advising you, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay. So this is, we'll see what happens. We're going to invite him on the 12th and say that we strongly suggest that you should show up because we want to get this project completed. And we'll do the best we can, but it's, if the developer says, I'm not going to play ball, it may be somewhat tricky.
Another path. Okay. Okay, any other questions for me?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What time?
12th at what time? No,
Well, since there is no public hearing,
Right.
you want to start him at
Well, we won't make any promises, but we'll try and keep you earlier in the meeting than later.
I'll watch for the agenda. They usually start at 7? Is that the normal time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
Do I have
Thank
your
you.
email?
I can give it to you. Why don't I choose it?
now, Ms. McKettrick, why don't you tell us about, this is a nice segue, about the bond or the restrictive covenant.
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of Wentworth Farm owner, and to talk about doing a restrictive covenant on 2 lots, which is something you talked about, or somebody did, I guess the building commissioner did earlier tonight, because this project, like some of the other ones you're talking about, is supposed to have in place either a cash bond or a surety bond or some kind of what they call in the permit, I think, putting up some lots. But I believe what that means is a restrictive covenant. That's what's used for subdivisions often, and what a restrictive covenant does is it says that the owner cannot sell the lots, cannot build on the lots, so they're just going to sit there, and should it happen that some of the improvements serving the lots are not completed, then the lots themselves become, the town actually can acquire them and sell them through this restrictive covenant. But I'm not anticipating that's going to happen. This is being chosen as the means for this development primarily because we need to get this in place. Because time is short, there are a lot of environmental restrictions on this project because of the access road is in wetlands and there's a stream. DEP has been at the site several times, beginning in August, working out when work can be done, how work can be done. And I think the developer that the town administrator was talking about is the developer for this project, because we've been in and out of the DPW quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, particularly this week. And so, just to go to the restrictive covenant issue, and I want to point out to you also that I did send you a letter. If you need copies of it, I can distribute them. Does everybody have that in front of them?
Yes.
And in addition to talking about the restrictive covenant, I tried, because of all of this discussion that's going on, I tried to review for you what's going on with this project, where we are in each of those requirements, because these are all requirements that are at the beginning of the project, and they do involve different entities. So some of them are Conservation Commission requirements, some of them are in the special permit, but, you have to figure out who's actually administering them. And I think this is a very good idea to have, some discussion in the town departments about the process. And enough said. I thought it was a good discussion, and hopefully it'll be really productive and help a lot. But from my perspective, what had to happen was, I like lists and I like checklists. And so, when you issue a permit, I haven't done a lot of these really, but the ones I've worked on with the Conservation Commission or with the Planning Board, I go through the permit and I produce a checklist for myself, because I feel that I, as the attorney, at least should send an initial communication to the client that these are the things you're expected to do in the beginning, and more or less this is when I think you're supposed to do them. It's not always completely clear, how that's supposed to work. So I've gone through the permit, and we've been working on all of those items. But this restrictive covenant or bond issue is one that's just been sitting there. We've been, trying to determine how best to do it. I wasn't sure what the lot being put up meant, but when I went back and looked at subdivision procedures and your own regulations and what other towns are doing, I realized this is a restrictive covenant. That's what we're talking about. So I've worked on wording for a restrictive covenant for lots 1 and 2. That's what you have before you. I did ask Mr. Whiteside to review it, because he is so excellent at reviewing this language, and I did some editing. These restrictive covenants have to be approved as to form by town council, but we need approval from the planning board that this will be an acceptable way to proceed, and I would like you to give, to say that this is sufficient so that we can proceed with what the issue right now is, putting the water pipe in that goes into this development, because the water pipe has to go in soon, or nothing's going to be able to be done. And the DEP wants it done right away, basically. They've worked out the procedures. They don't want any delay. They just want it done, because they don't want the land to be exposed too long. Water pipe is the first step, because the water pipe goes underneath the bridge. The bridge is the second step. You have to have some kind of compacted access. It's not a finished road, but you have to be able to get the equipment in to do that work. And we need this covenant or something at this point in order to, so that you have the protection that you're supposed to have in this permit. A couple of things that are in this covenant that you should pay attention to are that it can be converted to a cash bond or a surety bond. So at any point that the developer owner doesn't want to have the lots restricted, he can come up with a cash bond, or he can get a bond, a regular bond. The procedure for getting a regular bond tends to take a few weeks. It's somewhat lengthy, so it's not really practical when we're in a hurry, and we're in a hurry right now. But everybody was agreeable to this idea of doing everybody being the people working on the development, of doing the lot restriction. There's no problem with that. What I did do was to ask them to estimate the costs of all the improvements to the lots, and there are actually contracts in place for some of them. The bridge has already been purchased. The bridge upper part of the bridge is manufactured in Colorado, and then it's brought here in pieces. The support for the bridge, which is going to be faced with stone, is constructed on site. So there are contracts for that work. And this morning, Mr. Hamilton visited the DPW twice today, actually, because the engineer was, I did get that communication. The engineer was at a conference, but he was back this afternoon. He went over all of the numbers, and he sent an email to Mr. Clark, which I can read to you, or?
The last
to
page
us.
of your
You have it?
packet.
Okay. So what he gave, what we've given to the town engineer are the contracts themselves and then estimates for anything that isn't already under engagement with somebody for the work. And so he had to review a lot of paperwork. He was very good about that. We had already told him earlier in the week we wanted him to do it. And his conclusion is that the lot value for 2 lots is more than sufficient to guarantee the completion of the work. Now, I'm making the assumption that the lots are worth about $700,000 apiece. The cost of the work is estimated to be far less than $1.4 million, but I'm also assuming that the costs could be higher for some of this work. It's only estimates. It's not what you would do if you were doing a cash bond. In that case, you'd have to have specific, precise estimates from an estimator, and you'd want to know the cash bond was exactly the right amount for the remaining work. And you do sometimes do that if you haven't finished the last part of the road or something like that, and you want to do a cash bond at the end. So this is a procedure we used this week to try to put this information together quickly. I did have the town engineer review it. He's satisfied. Even if you estimate a much lower value for the 2 lots, there still should be ample security if 2 lots are restricted. There's, I guess, the main feature of this covenant, which is in a lot of standard ones that I've looked at, is this opportunity to convert it to a different type of bond. That's important because it might make more sense as time goes on, depending on how long the development takes to complete, to do that. There's legal language in here. I don't know whether town council's likely to change that or not. I see there's a misspelling. I always find something. But you can't sign this because this has to be reviewed by town council. And he, it's likely he'll change something, a word or, something. I rarely get something back that has absolutely no changes. So I would, ask you tonight to take a vote that you approve this, that you will sign it subject to town council review of the form and receipt of the finished document. And there's a signature. There is a not very large mortgage, but there's a mortgage on this property. The person holding the mortgage also has to sign this document. So I'm not going to get any notarized signatures until we get the form back from town council.
What does town council say about getting it done?
He
Mr.
has
Clark.
not responded at all.
How remarkable.
We did ask, we asked, well, I didn't, but Mr. Clark sent it as soon as we had the draft, and so we're waiting.
Okay, what do you think, Brian? You're our bond expert.
Yeah, so first of all, you're here at a very unfortunate time for any developer. So based on the issues we've been having, we're paying special attention to this document. So
Sure, that's fine. I mean, you should.
we should, but I don't know if we would have 6 months ago, but we are now.
Yeah, all right.
So one of the issues we are facing is not only completion of work, but ability to not get work done that's creating an emergency situation. So I would just look to you to consider language in 2 places. One is in number 9, that upon final completion of the construction of ways, the bridge and installation of municipal services as specified on the special permit and plan for the development therein, or upon substitution of an acceptable form of surety, I'd like to consider adding, and any repayment of town funds expended to correct issues created by work that constitutes an emergency condition requiring immediate repair, or something along those lines. In the event that the town needs to have some sort of surety that they can make an emergency repair at a site and know that they can be reimbursed. The other place that I would want to consider that is under number 5. If we are going to be asked to allow or if it sounds like in order to convert from a restricted covenant to a bond, you have to ask for the planning board?
Very definitely. This says that we have to come back to the planning board, or whoever is doing this
Yep.
for the owner, would have to come back to you. They would have to have prepared either, the surety bond or the cash bond.
Yep.
And if you do that, then the cash bond in particular, because you were talking about one earlier, you have to be able to show specifically what the costs are. It isn't just a general estimate. You have to have acceptable professional estimates of the remaining work. You would have to approve that. I think what you're talking about is I guess I'm a little confused. Well,
I'll go back to that. So in
I don't
that
know how to
case,
address that, but
since you
it's a
have
good
to come
idea,
back
yeah.
to us anyway for approval, I would just stipulate that if you were coming back to us for approval and you had established your costs, I would also be looking to create a similar pot of money to create an emergency situation for the town. But we can deal with that if you come back and even look to us. So
Okay.
going back to number 9,
Yep.
if the work that's being done creates some sort of, as an example, water infiltration onto another abutter's property and flooding condition, something. I'm just using a hypothetical here. And the developer doesn't cure that, and the water continues to inundate the property or inundate a road or wash out a road. Any number of things could happen. The DEP says you've created a dangerous environmental condition, and the developer says, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm upset. This is not right. I think the town needs to have some surety that they can now go in and fix that problem, so we don't have it affecting everybody else while we work it out with the developer. And this would allow us to then make sure that getting reimbursed for those expenditures could be a condition of releasing these 2 restrictive covenants. I'm not even sure if what I'm proposing is legal. I want town council to look at it, but it's something that would solve for the problem we have right now at Brushwood.
If the town can legally expend emergency funds, and if the town
But I'm
in
not sure
fact
it's legal,
does
right.
expend emergency funds, then I think that you can't really complain about reimbursing the town.
That's the part I'm not sure is legal, is spending the emergency funds.
Well, exactly.
the part I'm not sure
But
about.
that's, if they don't expend the emergency funds, then
Don't worry about it.
then there's nothing to. So, Marion, I think that that is not a very big.
I think we can address it.
Yeah,
I think
everything else I'm fine
it's obviously, it's been an interesting discussion tonight.
So, but I think that we want that water pipe to go in rather than to drag this process into another year, because so I think we should vote just the way Marion suggested.
Can I just ask a question of
Yeah.
Marion first, though?
Yes.
Marion, have there been any complaints from the neighbors about the way the construction's being managed thus far?
Not thus far. All they've done so far is take down trees
I
and
happened to be over
compact
on
the soil.
Ford
You can
Ranch.
see the entrance.
Yeah. I happened to be over there a week or 2 ago, and I noticed, that there's a construction vehicle, parked on the side of the road right opposite the Worthingtons, who I think had the concern about being across the street. So I just want to make sure that they're being considered with the way it's being managed.
They are. What's actually happening is the DEP has come in as a third-party player here.
Okay.
And there was a considerable discussion back and forth about initial placement of construction vehicles, like removing them entirely from the site every night. We're not even into that yet because they're not really doing this heavy work yet. And DEP wanted the vehicles kept close and the construction to be completed as quickly and expeditiously as possible. And they were absolutely non-negotiable on that issue. So they kind of trump everybody. I mean, the DEP controls the environmental aspects of this project. Conservation Commission is right there, just as concerned. But because they've been on site and sort of administering and managing it directly, the reason those vehicles are right there right now is because that's the way we've been told to do it. We do have a construction management agreement. It's quite detailed about what can be done, but there is a Phase 1A and a Phase 1B until you have a road and a place where you can put vehicles, they do have to be on the site. We haven't received complaints so far, but, there's not heavy work.
I have spoken to
you?
an abutter who says that the developer has been exceedingly cooperative.
Great, that's all I wanted to hear.
Sounds good to me. I hope the rest are.
We've had these meetings with DPW. I've been present for several of them. I just want to emphasize that the theme has been, we want to do things exactly the way we're supposed to. We want to be available. We want to know if you have an issue. But our main problem starting out was exactly what you talked about tonight. Who's in charge of what? I mean, it's clear to some extent that, Conservation Commission issues an order of conditions. It's very detailed. They won't, you can't get certification of completion unless you've done all of those. And many of the conditions are things that apply at particular points. They're not things that happen at the end. So they have to be complied with. And we've been meeting with the Conservation Commission every single time this summer. We're meeting again in October. It's complicated and it's getting done. But they do their own staff work, basically. And then they have, they work with the DPW. So the one thing I would warn you about, or not warn you about, but ask you to watch is, I think they're going to do a good job. Once they start meeting together, they're going to work this out. The pre-construction meeting is a very, very good mechanism. If there's a weekly or a bi-weekly management meeting in the town, that's where it can happen. You just invite the contractor, construction project manager in, and then all of a sudden you find out about these things that you didn't know about before because, there's a different angle or a question that a particular department has. So however they want to do it, if they have meetings on Thursdays, and that's when it always happens, that's when the developer would be there. This issue you're talking about tonight has just come up. We'll come up with some language to address it.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand the expedience required. I understand that the attorney hasn't looked at it yet, town council. So I have a proposal for simplified language so that we can vote on this and get you moving tonight.
Okay.
So rather than what I proposed before, but in the same location, and reimbursement of any funds expended by the town to enforce permits.
Well, isn't that too broad, though?
It's
gives us some
I
comfort.
think it's okay.
Leave it to them to decide whether they think it's...
I'm not going to
too broad.
agree to it unless something's in there.
Yeah, all right.
Because I don't think, with everything that's going on with our staff, until we have our checklists, we need some cover.
We want
I actually like
your
it.
agreement, Brian.
I like your first language better because they have to have a caveat anyway. The town council's going to review this and approve it, so...
This will...
I don't see...
We can provide draft language.
What's
Okay,
the
either
issue?
way.
If they expend money to enforce the permit,
This covers what I said, plus
Well,
whatever
do you have
else
to
we're
pay,
not even
do
thinking
they have to
of.
pay for the zoning enforcement officer to go out there once a week under that language?
It could.
Put the word unusual in there if you'd like.
say,
No, I mean, honestly, put the word unusual costs in there.
That was my...
Yeah, no, that's a great catch. So
Yeah.
let's put the word unusual in there.
Okay.
Unusual
Then I'm fine.
funds.
So what is the vote you want? You want us to approve this subject to the approval of town council and,
Additional language
well, no, with the additional language.
with the additional language.
But I mean, what we're approving is this with the additional language.
Subject to approval of town council.
Right, subject to the approval of town council.
So moved.
Second.
Anything else you want in that motion, Marion?
And that this approval
And that this
is approval that
should-
work can proceed on the site with the first step of it, which, whatever it is, I guess it's the water pipe installation, but that we can proceed. The problem here is we can't proceed unless we have this.
So I'll make a motion to approve the restrictive covenant as drafted with the amendment as discussed, with the language and reimbursement of any unusual funds expended by town to enforce permits, subject to town council approval, and with this conditional approval, the work may begin on the installation of the water pipe.
Okay.
And then you can come back if you need the bridge, if town council is still not approved.
Well,
But-
Certainly hope not, but
All right. We hope not to.
yes, thank
April,
you.
do you still second that?
Second, yep.
We've got a second. Do we have any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, and Bill can write it up, and I can sign it if necessary, or Bill can sign it, whatever you need. Not, as long as it's within the vote.
I assume we're going to try to draft this language that we're talking about, and that will go to town council.
Okay, fine.
Okay. One other thing, I don't want you to do anything with it, but I've sent you the declaration of trust for this development, which is quite long. I realize there's a lot of sort of legal language in there. Some will be interested in that, some will not. But you really need to read it. Read the restrictions and the easements towards the end. We've already been reviewing it with the Conservation Commission. They've made a couple of requests. They want the O&M plan to be an appendix, which I think is a good idea, because then every lot owner who buys a lot gets a copy of this restriction, and with the restriction is going to be the operations and maintenance plan for the drainage for the project. And it's pretty detailed, because we've added some things. So please review that, and we'll add, after maybe October 17th, when I meet with the Conservation Commission,
Okay.
we'll come back.
You
Right
have that
now.
as part
What?
3. You have that as part...
Everyone has that.
Everyone has it, yeah.
Now, bear in mind that number 300 Highland Street, the A&R plan has been continued to our next meeting. So anyone who's here to discuss that should come back
Thank you, Marion.
Thank you.
You're going to answer my questions later?
next time. Now, we're going to do a proposed site plan for 475 Adams Street. And this is a project that the applicant is going to request a variance to build a commercial building, a mixed-use building in a residential zone outside of zoning. But the Board of Appeals just last week indicated that input from the planning board was important to them, and this application seeks input from the planning board, although it is not a site plan approval in the usual context. However, we will be working on it as if it were. So, Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Ned Corcoran here with Steve Conley, who with his father Jerry, as the principals of 131 Elliott Street LLC, own the property at 475 Adams Street. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation. We gave this last night to the East Milton Neighborhood Association, and I think it helps define the property in some context. And I don't have a laser pointer, so I'm going to come up to the screen. The property is located in East Milton on Adams Street, just on the westerly side of the expressway. This is the post office. This is what I call the Jubenville building. This is the Blue Hills Bank building that the board recently granted site plan approval on. This is the property in question, 475 Adams Street. This is the east, it's the Church of Our Savior. So it's a stretch of east of Adams Street in East Milton that is more commercial or non-conforming than it is simply residential. The history of this property is that it was permitted over years as a doctor's office. Most recently, Dr. Dan Driscoll had his office there. Those permits lapsed some years ago, and since the building is now vacant and hasn't been used for the last probably 8 to 10 years. There was an interim owner who owned it, and in anticipation of having the ability to put a real estate office in with apartments, did a lot of interior demolition, and the building is in very, very poor condition. It was determined to be preferably saved by the Historical Commission. About a year and a half ago, we went before the Historical Commission. They put a 9-month delay on the demolition. That 9 months has lapsed, and we're moving forward with a plan to change that. It's really not savable and reusable for any significant purpose. The property is triangular in shape. The Jubenvilles, it was earlier divided with an A&R, and a strip of land was acquired, actually it was here, by Jubenville to add to his parking area, which reduced the size. The lot is itself slightly more than 15,000 square feet, and it has a couple hundred feet of frontage. It could be divided with some difficulty, into two 7,500 square foot lots with 75 feet of frontage and become two conforming lots with single-family dwellings put on each one. But it's very difficult to think about how you would divide that lot and provide driveway access for each lot to a very busy stretch of Adams Street. Given its history as an office building for doctors with apartment upstairs, it seems logical to try to replicate that use. In order to do it, we need a variance. So that's the context of the property. If you go to the next slide. That's the existing building as it looks from Adams Street. The property, the Adams Street was widened at the time that the expressway was put in, and so front yard that previously existed was eliminated. The sidewalk comes right up to the edge of that front porch. The building is perpendicular to the lot. It actually goes almost all the way back to the lot line, that diagonal lot line in the rear, and there is a barn structure towards the rear on the left at the end of that driveway. Next.
You can actually change it with that thing.
Okay.
And you
this
can point with it.
This is a look of the property as you're coming easterly on Adams Street. The building beyond is the Jubenville building.
Try it again. Red's not working. Red's working. I'm looking at it.
I'm trying to change the slide. There we go. So the proposal is a building that will be set back about 12 feet off of the edge of the retaining wall at the edge of the sidewalk. And it would be a little more than 2,000 square feet in footprint, with two 1,000 square foot offices on the first floor and two small two-bedroom apartments on the second. There'll be parking in the rear for 10 vehicles. That's compliant with the requirement for zoning, which would be for 2,000 square feet, you'd need 8 parking spaces, and for 2 apartments in a residency zone, you need 1 parking space per unit. Because it's proposed to be office and residential, we think there's a fairly straightforward trade of spaces between the evening and weekend use as opposed to the daytime use for parking. We think there's an adequacy of parking, and the building commissioner in his denial letter determined that there wasn't that the parking did comply with zoning, and there was no need for a variance determination with respect to parking. So. The next, that is the Juben building. The building is intentionally designed to look like it fits next to the Juben building. The Jubenville building obviously is set back further. It is a much larger building. It has office on first and second floor and a couple of apartments on the third floor, but it looks similar in architecture. And so we think this building fits. It is a use that fits next door. It is a very quiet, the Jubenville building, as I've been able to determine, is a very quiet office use. Rarely see traffic coming in and out during the day and during the evenings, and I think a similar outcome would exist here. The site plan is fairly simple. It is This is the outline of the existing building. It was originally this component of the building with an add-on in the rear, and then the barn structure back here. The building would be turned horizontal horizontal to the site and parallel to the sidewalk, and sit as far away from the abutting properties in the rear. The driveway would be moved slightly to the left. Right about there is an existing utility pole. So we're moving the driveway from this side of the toll to the other side of the pole to come in to a 10-lot parking, 10-space parking lot in the rear. There are 3 variances that are necessary for this purpose. One is a use variance to allow the mixed use with the office in the residential zone. The second is a front yard setback variance. The setback requirement in residency zone is 20 feet. The building would be 12 feet off the front yard, and it would have an overhang. This sort of overhang, all the structure over the front door is actually only 6 feet off the front yard. So that is a dimensional variance that's necessary for the building. The third variance deals with, and this doesn't quite pick up the edges, the boundaries of the parking area, but the parking in the rear here is 5 feet off of this right side lot line. The bylaw requires 10 feet for parking areas exceeding, I think it's 5 spaces. So there's a variance necessary for that. The Conleys have met with the owners in the rear and have begun to discuss fencing and plantings. The proposal would be fencing along the rear lot line and arborvitaes to be planted along the edge. There's some existing mature trees in this area that would remain. This is a proposal for a new tree. I'm not sure exactly what type. There's a couple of mature trees back here as well be retained, and there would be new planting in along the front sidewalk. And so that's the plan. It's a fairly simple and straightforward plan. We're obviously open to comments that this board might have. The schedule going forward is that we now have a hearing date on October 12th, which would be the same night as your next meeting. On the Tuesday night before the 10th, we plan to go before the Board of Selectmen to brief them and be on television at least one more time before we get to the Board of Appeals. And then we'd propose to be back here, presumably on the 26th, if possible, assuming that we're successful with the decision of the Board of Appeals. We'd come back here to have a more formal determination made by this board with respect to site plan approval. We know that the board cannot vote tonight to grant site plan approval because we don't have the right to do what we're proposing, and we need the right to do that before you can vote. But we do know that you at least have the ability to comment in anything that you thought would be important to include in a decision of the Board of Appeals, or at least that the board could be aware of and consider in their decision, that they would have the benefit of that, the advice of the board in that regard. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to you for questions and comments.
My interest is, of course, what the neighbors think about this. But if people, we can go right into taking public comment on the plan, and then we can ask some questions if we want it. Why don't we do that? Okay, who would like to be heard on this application? Yes.
Thank you. Steve O'Donnell, Chair of the Historical Commission. Mr. Corcoran is right on the nail here when he talks about the commercial and the commercial and organizational, institutional impact on East Milton in general, and the stretch of Adams Street in particular. What this proposal does is exacerbates that impact. What you see on the screen there is the outline of the building that's currently on the lot. It's about 30 feet across the front facing Adams Street with a fair amount of open space on either side. Actually, the square footage of what's there now is not terribly different from what they're proposing. But what they're proposing is a 78-foot-long building 12 feet back from the Adams Street sidewalk, essentially creating a wall. When you come across the Wood Street overpass towards Adams Street, this is what you see. Anybody crossing from one side of the expressway to the other coming into Milton is looking at this. Historical Commission has 2 comments and two suggestions. One is to rotate the building 90 degrees so that it is end to Adams Street, very similar to what's there now. This leaves a fair amount of open space on either side. You have the church on one side, you have Mr. Jubenville's building, which has been described as considerably larger than this, on the other. Turning the building end to the street would give the open space. And secondly, if that were done, it would not be difficult to include the oldest portion of the existing building in the new project. The new building would have to be, the new building is 34 by 78, I think. It would have to be a little wider as it went back on the lot. But what you would accomplish is you would retain some of the scale and character of mid-19th century East Milton. This house was built by a granite worker. East Milton was built up by the granite trade. When applicants come and ask for concessions from the town, that benefits the applicant. If the town requests concessions from the applicant, it benefits the entire town. And this would benefit, suggestions such as we've made, would benefit this whole section of East Milton by reducing density along the street and leaving some open space. It can be worked, the parking can be reconfigured, it can be done. Yeah, I suspect it's going to cost a few more dollars, and it may cost a little more time, but the long-range benefit will greatly benefit the entire community. Thank you.
Who else would like to be heard on this application?
Do we have to settle?
You have to, yes, you do. But don't, it's...
Don't be afraid.
It's not,
It's absolutely painless.
we will not bite.
Okay, so my name's Dan Stock. We abut the property directly behind them. Yeah, right. Yeah. We don't mind what they're proposing now, in our opinion. The gentleman who just spoke, I like the idea, other than the fact that it's going to put the building closer to our property line. So I still think that the plan that is being presented now is better for the neighbors.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How do you feel about the parking coming up?
I'm not thrilled about the parking, but I wouldn't want the building closer to our property line than what they're proposing. They've been great to us the whole time, so we can work that out. But turning the building that way, I don't like the red building. We can't wait to see it torn down. I mean, it's dilapidated, to say the least. As an abutter, I approve of their suggestions and their, what they're proposing to do. So,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jim Fitzgerald. I'm Danny's father-in-law. I also live there. The only concern we would have now is if we went along with the Historical Society and kind of turned it that way, we'd need to see everything as far as the parking goes before we could make a decision on really what we thought. The area from the property line that's going to have the 5-foot space to parking, I really it's tight, but, I mean, if there's some type of, I don't know, 5 feet seems an awful close amount to the property line. I mean, we probably prefer 10 feet, but if
Zoning
there's-
says 10 feet.
If what?
The
It says-
zoning, it says 10 feet.
Yeah, and they propose in 5. I mean, we prefer 10 over 5 for obvious reasons. I don't know if there's any happy medium that can be done with that, but I just think that's one point that we weren't quite aware of, right? Yeah.
Well, and with 10 feet, you can put more planting in.
Well, more buffer there. Yeah, like I said, maybe, even 7 feet with more buffer, I don't know. Maybe there's a medium that we can meet, but 5 feet seems awful close to the property line.
Where's the,
And
it has more than 10. Excuse me for a moment, are you at 12 Babcock?
Well, Mr. Corcoran,
16? 16, 18, thank you.
No,
Right here, okay.
it's just when you say 5 foot, what you think of immediately.
we really should not have conferences when we're taking testimony.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I guess it would be a Mr. Corcoran. You had said that they need 8 spaces, but your plan has 10 spaces. Have you considered maybe eliminating 1 or 2 of those spaces?
I think that would be an interesting approach. We had thought about perhaps 8 spaces. We requested 10. One of the things that plan doesn't show, but are in the plans that were submitted, is that there's a pretty significant grade change currently as you go from the front to the rear. And that will be leveled down where the parking area is. So the parking layer will be lowered by several feet. And then the fencing that will be installed will be fairly high. I agree with the concern about turning the building, because you'll have a 2.5-story building that will be coming closer to the property line. We wanted to keep that as far away. I think if this board were to recommend it, we would be comfortable with 8 or 9 spaces as opposed to 10, and you can eliminate the space that is closest to that rear lot. That would, I'm not sure that would be a parking sharing calculation. It might require a minor amendment to the variance request, because under the parking requirements, you need 8 to meet the requirements for the office. So 4 per 1,000 square feet. It's 2,000 square feet of office. I need 8, and I need 1 per unit upstairs. So on a raw gross count, I need 10. You can share them, and we think that there's a good argument to be made for parking sharing, because office works during the day, and occupants of residents live upstairs at night, and they're there on weekends, and there's really not much conflict with respect to that. So I wouldn't be averse to amending the request on the parking if this board thought that that was an appropriate way to address that issue.
Alex? Another thought on the parking is you could consider tandem, because if you have people who are there during the day working there, they could probably park one another in. And then that just reduces the amount of pavement, but not the number of parking spaces, so that you can get more of a buffer there.
I have another suggestion. The parking spaces we're proposing are 19 feet in depth.
The existing
We could go to 18. And also, the corridor, the double-loaded corridor for the parking is currently 25 feet. We could squeeze that to 22, which would gain, that would double the size of that setback, which would alleviate their concern without losing spaces.
That would get us back to 10 feet, and we wouldn't need the variance.
Eliminate the waiver request. You also have on-street parking here in front of?
There are spaces there.
There are spaces that are available to the district, but that are not.
They're not dedicated to the project. I'm just pointing it out that it is
Service them,
available.
aren't they?
So
They are, I'm not positive.
I think they service them.
I think just reducing the amount of pavement and getting a better buffer by doing what you suggested seems like a fine suggestion to me. I just want to make as the architect on this board, a comment about the architecture and the scale, because I do think it can be handled. Right now, it's just straight across. You know, that building could step a little bit. You know, you could have like if you look at the Jubenville building, it's not a simple rectangular footprint, right? So if you look at the scale of that coming across, like maybe that section on one side of them steps back into the site a little bit, or maybe both of them do, so that the center sticks out a little bit forward. And maybe it's not symmetrical like it is here in terms of the way the roof pitches are, just to give more of scale breakdown. If you think about the scale that Mr. O'Donnell was talking about, you know, right now it is kind of planar, and it is towards the street, and it has sort of a little bit larger scale than what you have there currently. But I think from the design point of view, you can address that a little bit with the footprint of it and a little bit with the detailing of it. So if you have that pointer, Bill? Can you go to the site plan? Or I can go to the site plan? Which direction? Oh, there it is, okay. So I'm suggesting if you think like that is the width that people are accustomed to seeing now, right? So if you thought about this, so the steps like that, you would have to look at how it impacts the parking. So there's obviously a little bit of site work that would have to happen with that. You wouldn't have to necessarily take it all the way around, but it could at least project here that scale towards the street. And then maybe you don't have such pronounced dormer, you know, symmetrically on it. Maybe it's more on one side than on the other. So just, I think the concern about having it go back at that existing width, like, okay, sorry. If you turn that, you know, and let's say you're going to get that width to fit, you're really looking at something like that's in there. And then you're looking at how do you park it, and you're going to have like more asphalt, I think. So I think if you dealt with breaking the scale a little differently, keep the building where it is, like, it could work architecturally. Not 100% the way it is historically, but it could be better than what it is. You can get that architect to do a good job.
All right, who else wants to be heard?
Hi, my name is Martin Shields. I live at 26 St. Agatha Road. My issue with it is the traffic. And if we could just go back to the slide that shows us the traffic as it comes over the highway. Yeah, so you can see, is that laser pointer, Bill? Red dot. So you can see the traffic will come down here, and it gets very busy different parts of the day. I'm not sure where you're planning on putting your driveway, but people will come flying down here, get stuck here, and try to make it across 2 lanes of traffic, I think, to get into some sort of a driveway here. Most likely, they won't make it in there. They're going to go all the way around here, down through this neighborhood, back through here. Or take the wrong turn and try to bang a Yui here, or go down St. Agatha Road. So I think I don't have a problem with the look of the building or anything. My issues are with traffic. My issues are with, you know, who does this get rented to? We can't really guarantee who it's going to get rented to, what type of a business it's going to be, what kind of traffic that's going to bring, and, you know, how often cars will be pulling in and out of there. The traffic there is very heavy as it is now at different times of the day. So, you know, even getting out of my own driveway, or not out of my driveway, but out of my own street is very difficult sometimes because the traffic will just be stuck there. So we have to think about, you know, what that's going to do to the traffic there. You know, there was a doctor there, I guess, 10 years ago. This is, you know, I moved into my house about 10 years ago. There was a doctor there before that. There's no guarantee that there's going to be any sort of a same situation. We can't really know out in the future who's going to rent the building, so I have concerns there. Just, you know, basically, I'm sort of against commercializing a residential zone, which is what we have now. So, thank you.
So Does this mean you're against retail?
In general, no.
No, I mean in this particular building. I mean, if the first floor were 2 shops.
Yeah, I'm against the sprawl of retail in East Milton Square.
Not retail, right?
That's not planned for retail, correct?
No.
It's office.
Planned for office, right?
What?
Retail, right?
The request is for office.
Okay. And once they get office, they cannot switch to retail, correct?
Why not?
Well, because the
If it
variance
changes to
will be
commercial, does
specific
that
to the
change?
use.
Oh, okay.
The variance would be specific to the
What is the
nature of
use you're asking for?
office. We're not asking for retail. We're asking for office.
So that could be any sort of an office, a doctor's office, dentist office. I mean, it's the same to me. It's traffic. You know, you could have plenty of traffic going into an office like that if it's a doctor or a dentist. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I think my best response to the issue of traffic is there's traffic in East Milton. We're adding perhaps a drip or two to the fire hose. Not going to have any impact. The driveway itself is being moved further away from this move. That move is made today all day long. People come across, they go to the post office, they come into the Jubenville building, they'll be coming here and they'll be entering here and exiting this way. An earlier site plan that we had the driveway over here, which would have required some sort of, that would have introduced that U-turn or some other move here. This is the safest and most and easiest move to account for with respect to the entry and exit from this site.
I mean, my general thought about, you have to have access to this site, and you have, as you said, put the driveway in about the best place you can put it. It's not as if you can say to someone who owns this property that you can't access it from a public way. So I think the best you can do is try and put it in the best location. And then the question is what the use is in terms of how many vehicles it might generate, right? So, having, that size of office space is not going to be a huge driver of traffic in my mind. And the impact of having a doctor's office there in the past, it was there for 30 years, right? And they had to get their variance renewed every 5 years, right? Or something like that?
No, once the permit was granted, it was in place.
Okay, so those uses continued, though, that didn't create a lot of traffic problems at this location under those uses? I do think retail would generate more traffic, so I do share the concern that people said about whether it would be retail, but I don't think the office is going to generate an inordinate amount of traffic in the 2 units.
Can I just ask for clarification? So this is zoned for one single-family house?
This is zoned 7,500 square feet, house lots with 75 feet of frontage. It's possible to cut this lot into 2 house lots. You would then have 2 driveways, accessing and egressing, unless you created a shared driveway.
So instead, you're
No intent
proposing
to cut the lot.
2 residential units and 2 office spaces?
With a single driveway and 1 parking area to serve the entire building.
And that office space requires 2 parking spaces?
Zoning requires
By zoning?
4 spaces per 1,000 square feet for all commercial. This doesn't differentiate between retail and office. I have 1,000 square feet. I don't see clients in my office. I generally go elsewhere. Some people do receive clients periodically. Others go off. I think that the notion of traffic and traffic volumes is maybe 1 or 2 vehicles in and out in the morning, another 1 or 2 in and out in the afternoon per office, max. I don't see, it's not going to be a heavy flow. If there were a doctor's office and a doctor were receiving patients throughout the day, you see 1, then you see the next, and you see the next. There's a little bit of a churn, but it's not a heavy churn. It is a very occasional, during the day, churn of traffic that would come to and from that building.
So, generally speaking, this project is a great, nice upgrade to the neighborhood, and it seems to be in keeping with what East Milton Square is, and as a commercial district, I realize this is a residential building by zoning, but has been a commercial building for its history. Not quite sure I agree with your expert traffic analysis there. As your office, that might be right, but if this is a doctor's office, again, which it could be, it could see churn. I'm going to take this opportunity as my first opportunity of probably many to point out to the listening public that if we had a revolving traffic fund, we could encourage a donation be made to that traffic fund, because I do think the traffic impact will be minimal here, but there will be a traffic impact. And if we had a revolving traffic fund, this applicant could make a donation to that fund as part of its mitigation. And that would begin hopefully to put together some money that we could actually make a dent in our traffic problem in East Milton. So I just say that for the listening public. I also do say it for the ZBA, that to the extent the ZBA can condition its approval on such a donation, if there is something that we can have a contribution of some number, a reasonable number, since it's a minimal traffic impact, I think that would be appropriate here to recognize that there is a traffic impact due to the use, but that certainly the volume of traffic doesn't warrant any sort of actual mitigation, but perhaps a contribution towards a study or something would be appropriate. Otherwise, I think the project is pretty nice.
I have a couple of concerns. One is the fence facing the neighbors. It seems to me the fence should be right in the middle of a 10-foot buffer, and there should be landscaping on both sides of the buffer so that the neighbors just don't look at a fence. And so that the people who are using this building don't just look at a fence, so that there's landscaping on both sides of the fence that goes down the lot line along the back. The other concern I have is you have two-bedroom apartments, but you have no open space for them, so the people are going to be sitting in the parking lot, and that doesn't seem right to me.
There's a fair amount of lawn area to the right of the building and to the rear of the building that's away from the parking lot. Building doesn't take up.
This whole triangular section there. Here, right?
Oh.
Well,
You'll be able to walk across the beautiful new park that's being...
We'll be able to walk across the parking lot to their picnic, yeah. Of course, if we were doing a site plan approval, we would want to know what this building is made of, and a number of other things. What sort of parking, what sort of landscaping along the Jubenville border, if any. And the Historical Commission is, I can't say they're wrong. But of course, the neighbors, I can't say they're wrong. We've got a few differing opinions here. So.
I would just, with respect to what might happen along the Jubenville side, I think the Jubenville owns the fence that exists along that edge of the property. 'cause he expanded his parking lot and put that fence in, and the driveway is being moved so that it's very much up against that fence. I'm not sure there's much that can be done other than a small planting strip along there, because this driveway, this drive aisle is 18 feet? 17 feet wide, so...
His parking is on the other side of that fence.
There's a sidewalk here, there's a handicap ramp that has to come in and around, provides handicapped access to the building.
Can I ask a question? So is the Juvenile lot parking lot on the opposite side of that fence?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. So it's not a swath of green area?
He acquired that stretch of the property
right.
in order to be able to expand his parking area. And he's met with the Conleys and fully supportive of what's being proposed.
Okay, take that pointer back again. I mean, the way this is set back as compared to where the existing building is now, I mean, even if you had a portion of the building maybe not come quite as far here, but came out to here, and maybe if the rest of the building moved back just a little bit by having shrunk your parking spaces a little bit, or having shrunk that drive lane in the back a little bit, I still think you could address the scale of the building from the street that way. You could change the color of the siding. You could change the size of the siding so that you're getting more of that appearance of that smaller scale right there. And then, dark colors recede, so maybe you use a little darker color, so it's a little lighter color coming forward. And so I think architecturally you can solve the scale issue here a lot easier than you can solve the site plan issue by turning the building, and then what do you do with the parking and the buffer and the green space? I think you're going to end up with less green space and less parking that way. So I do think that this is, from what I can gather from the dimensions that are here, this is probably about 1,600 or 1,700 square feet of green space just in this triangle. And that footprint's about 2,600 square feet. So that's not even counting the green space in the back and along the buffer. So, I mean, as far as a percentage of green space to the footprint of the building, I mean, I'm comfortable with that amount of green space as a response, but I really do think that tweak of the architecture is not a significant impact on the site plan.
My only concern with respect to that is that it may change the request for variance, which would require a re-advertising and a new hearing.
But you didn't have to advertise before coming to us, so you took your chances.
I think we'll go forward as it's proposed. We'll deal with, we'll consider whether we can adjust that within the variance that's been requested.
Well, in terms of my view of the impact of that design versus the architectural suggestion of breaking the scale down, I think that changes it significantly. So in terms of whether this board feels comfortable with this proposal going forward, I don't know about how quickly you could get on that, change that hearing, but I understand they meet every 2 weeks.
They don't meet on a regular schedule. They meet when they constitute themselves.
And the average has been about 2 weeks, is what I'm told.
But it's different. It's a different board. With respect, there's 9 members of that board. 3 of them meet.
Well, just by having heard the neighbors and hearing the historical commission in terms of how to try and be where you take into consideration the concerns of each, I think it would be useful to see. If you didn't come forward, whether you could step certain parts of the building back a little bit further. So it wouldn't require you to go to re-advertise necessarily, but if you squeeze a little bit out of your parking area and you got a little bit of relief in the facade, then I don't think it would change your variance request.
We have a little bit of room to maneuver because the front front entryway is 6 feet deep. So that is the variance point, is the front of that. That's 6 feet off the lot line. possible to think about adjusting that scale and bringing
Right.
the
So if you
building
if you go
forward.
back to the photo of the existing building. So, the scale that presents in its width, right, is different than that portico. So if you could adjust it without hitting the variance difference, I think you could address the concerns of the Historic Commission.
But certainly you should do something with respect to the Historical Commission.
Well, we did a significant amount with respect to the Historical Commission because we spent a fair amount of time with them a year and a half ago. And unfortunately, we're not able to make reuse of that portion of the building as they had requested us to do. And so that was a difficult determination to make. It was a lot of expense to go through that. It was a process to determine and evaluate the condition of the building and whether or not it could be resaved and whether or not you could add to it and how you could do it. And we can't. And so we need to replace it. And by replacing it, we had to think about how does the new building lay out on the property relative to how close it is to the neighbors in the rear lot line. How does it lay out relative to parking? And so that's a trade-off, and I think that at the end of the day, the trade that's being made with a building that's horizontal to the street, with parking that is shoved as much as it can be up against the Jubenville property and tucked as far away from that rear lot line as we can, is the best outcome that we could produce relative to this site.
I still think that architecturally you could make an adjustment that could kind of break that scale down a little bit and still reach the other objectives that you've outlined.
We'll see what we can do on that.
So I just want to applaud you for doing a nice job of engaging the neighbors. I think it's nice that your neighbors came out to share their opinion and were largely favorable. So I think that's something that we encourage applicants to do. So nice work. I don't know anything about architecture. I think what Cheryl's proposing sounds like a nice compromise. If it's doable, great. I think the idea that you can move the parking off the rear lot line to accommodate your neighbors is great. Sounds like you've already come to a concession there, which is terrific. And I think the access issue, Cheryl brought it up the first time you brought the project to us. I think you resolved it to the greatest extent that you can. And as Cheryl said, you can't prohibit somebody from accessing their lot off a public way. So I think you've done the best you can there. And I think you've laid out a nice plan. I know this isn't a designated commercial district, but I think when you look at the designated commercial district, it falls short of the boundary that it probably should have had from the very beginning to incorporate all of the existing commercial uses that have been there for eons. So I generally feel pretty positive about what you've proposed. On the topic of traffic, I totally understand Mr. Fitzgerald's comments. I do tend to agree if this is going to be a 1,000 square foot office use, it's very unlikely that there'll be a significant traffic impact. But to Brian's point, I mean, we have $2.7 million of federal money to do something on the deck to fix a problem that's far in excess of probably $20 million. So to the extent that we can use future projects to help support some of that need, I would fully support, but that is irrelevant to this project because we don't have the vehicle in place. But I think it looks like a nice project.
Can I just ask another question?
Yes, sir.
So I just wanted to know about, so as it stands now, the barn does block view of Blue Hills Bank out of our windows. It does provide blocking.
Like a buffer?
Yeah. So, and there's some trees, but I don't, is there a way to get a natural buffer, like something that, so we're not staring at that blue sign from our kitchen, you know what I mean? That's something to think about for us. But
I see there's
well,
a tree. Is this roughly where you are?
Yeah, basically the whole back of that property is abutting our backyard.
You're planning to put trees back there?
Along the fence line.
Yeah.
They installed a 6-foot fence there already.
Yeah.
There's a triangular section in the plan that would have trees, right? The next, like what the site plan shows, some trees, I think, right?
So those arborvitae, those trees there, yeah, I don't know.
Behind the parking?
When the barn comes out, depending on how close, I haven't paid attention to how close those 2 trees are to the barn that's going to be removed, the foundation. When you do that, you're disturbing the roots. We'll just have to see how that would go.
They're existing trees.
But they're existing.
Oh, I see, okay.
But there is a 6-foot fence there that you put, I don't know if you can...
Well, we can see right over it, too. It is an issue for us.
There is going to be, those arborvitaes will go all the way along the fence line, which...
How tall do they grow?
We have beautiful trees out there now that we don't see anything because the barn covers everything, and these big old trees that have been there forever are beautiful. If they all go, and the barn goes, we're going to be looking out across the street.
So you think the
And
trees...
it's not going to look residential at all. We put a fence in, we've done a ton of work to the house. I just don't want to be looking at it back. I just, I want some of it, the natural, to stay, the beautiful trees. I actually personally like the barn, but that has to go.
The barn provides blockage of the
traffic.
What's that, Adam Street?
We should have a plan showing where the current trees are and whether or not any of them are going to be removed. And then there should be a planting plan for new trees.
If that's going to be a green space back there, that would be nice.
Well, I mean, the reason we're having this hearing is to determine what the people in the neighborhood would like to see there.
Well, we support what they're doing. We just want to not be able to see Blue Hills Bank from the kitchen. That's, the barn provides that now. I know the barn has to come down. We're fully aware of that. But if there was a way to...
And there are existing trees there.
Yes.
And so the question is, what's going to happen to the existing trees? And whether or not new trees are proposed. And arborvitae, what were those trees that Wentworth Farms is talking about, those spruce trees that get
Oh, yeah.
that attain significant heights fast?
Yes, I could look those up.
In the back of Mr. Rentel's granddaddy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, those.
Yeah. So that's something we can address during the site plan approval?
What?
If this moves forward and gets a variance, we can address these in the site plan approval, right?
It's expensive.
These issues?
Well, I mean, the question is what we're going to say to the Board of Appeals.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean, if that's the problem of doing a preliminary site plan approval, because we think, I mean, some people think that the site plan needs to be changed. The building needs to be changed. I think that there needs to be a 10-foot buffer. And I think there needs to be a planting plan, and I think the existing trees need to be identified, and if they're proposing to remove any of them, I want to know which ones they are.
Right.
I think that if we're going to have a sitting area for the tenants, it should be shown. The parking obviously has to be adjusted, because if you change these things around, it has to be adjusted, but I think it's probably doable.
So when they go to the Board of Appeal, is this plan locked in after that?
Well, that's what I was
Or is it the
wondering.
use and the square footage of it? Just the variances. They could come back with a tweaked site plan, right?
Well, no, but there's no necessity that they get site plan approval at all.
Right.
The Board of Appeals says so.
No, it's required, and because it's a commercial use, subject to site plan approval.
So,
Unless the board gives a variance to that zoning requirement. It's a zoning, it could be
We
waived.
didn't request that variance. We don't intend to request that variance. We intended to come back to the board, to this board for site plan.
What is the zoning provision you're talking about?
I'm talking about the use provision, the front yard setback provision, and the rear yard setback for parking.
But if you get those waived,
Then I still have to get site plan approval, which means I have
well,
to
that's
address
what you
other
say,
issues.
but I'm not sure you're right.
Well, the building commissioner is firm in that opinion.
Well,
And he has not issued.
They can also stipulate that in their variance.
I mean, I personally feel as if what we've been talking about are tweaks to the plan, to the site plan, because I feel as if there's some consensus that turning that building would make the site plan less desirable. And if I've understood us incorrectly, let me know. But given that, the size of the building, if we're generally comfortable with the number of parking spaces and the size of the building, and we think that they can address our concerns about the architecture and some of the more detail, some of that setback, if we're comfortable that they can address that and come back with site plan approval, then I would definitely be supportive of just sending along our concerns and comments to the Board of Appeal, and then review the site plan when it comes in for site plan approval.
ZBA should stipulate it's granting a variance if it so chooses to grant a variance, that this variance, that anything with a commercial use is still subject to site plan approval. To belt and suspenders, any concerns that Alex has.
I mean, I think the thing that we should also, be clear about, because I think we've agreed, is that we wouldn't be supportive of retail because we would be concerned about the traffic implications at this location, but that the commercial office use and the residential up above. But, I mean, that's what you've applied for, but I think just from a variance point of view, you want to make sure that that's clear, right, in the variance.
No, we very clearly asked for relief to allow 2 1,000-square-foot offices.
Yeah.
That's the only relief that would be granted with respect to the use, the mixed use. I know that in another matter where the board had site plan approval over 37 Central Avenue, we had a variance because, in a special permit, because it was a mix of office and residential upstairs. I tried to argue with the Board of Appeals that they didn't need site plan approval and that they should vary the requirement that we needed site plan approval. And I said, no, that was a different condition, it was a different board that had jurisdiction over it, and they refused to do that, and I was forced to come back to this board after the fact for site plan approval. And understanding that, we understood that we had to go through a parallel process, and that this board can't determine site plan approval until you have the authorization to do so. Your authorization is triggered by the variance that grants the commercial use.
So if Alex comes to and have the same agreement, then I'd like to suggest that we send our general support to the Board of Appeal, that we outline the couple of concerns that we've had that we'd like to see addressed when you come back to us for site plan approval. And we can go through what those are. Just throw this out for my other board members to see if they would agree with that approach.
And I don't have a problem with that to the extent that those modifications don't implicate
setbacks, variances.
They don't modify the variances, or don't increase the variances.
Don't increase the variances.
well, of course, the parking may.
I think actually if
It would reduce
the
it.
parking area to reduce the
It would reduce the variance.
You eliminate that the setback
Yeah.
requirement. And that will increase the green space on the rear as well.
But there's opportunity in the site plan review to see the implications of those suggestions, right? So if it deemed to be causing more of an impact to an abutter, then, then that might be something that we continue to look at. Or, maybe it's not 10 feet, maybe it's 7 feet, or something, a balance in the overall site plan.
I don't want to see us whipsawed by having the Board of Appeals grant a variance that we cannot work around on site plan approval. I mean, Mr. Corcoran mentions that what we do has to be within the scope of the variance or we can't do it, or he doesn't want us to do it. And I don't think that's the way it should be.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, that's what I heard you say.
What I'm saying is that I don't want to have to recreate the variance component. I need a front yard setback, I need a use variance. If we adjust the parking, the scale of the parking area, I eliminate the need for the variance on the parking. Those are the two variances. I don't want to touch those. I'm willing to come back to address site plan issues, plantings, green space, facade of the building, those things that are beyond the scope of that are relative to how the site gets developed, but they're not relative to the ability to produce the building that we want to produce under zoning. It's a difference. If this were an authorized use in the commercial zone, or I needed a special permit like I needed at 37 Central Avenue to do a mixed use, because I can't do one or can't do both. I can't do residential and commercial in any zone without at least a special permit.
So I'm going to make a general statement to the board and to the listening public that if we had, if we look at our districts and we look at our commercial districts and we look at the properties that, as April said, maybe should have been in the district to start with, and if we had design guidelines for those districts, then it makes it a lot easier to have the conversations about what's appropriate in terms of the architecture, in terms of the scale and proportion, in terms of the street front alignments, et cetera, instead of each project having to come before us and do it individually, and then it has to be negotiated in a site plan review. So it is something that I'd like to advocate that the board start to take a look at. Design guidelines, at least for our business districts, and for businesses that may fall outside of the districts but are still business uses.
Well,
that's not going to help today with this, but
Look, I'm satisfied with what Mr. Corcoran has represented, and I take it as a representation, what he just said. And I think that we can say that we have reviewed it, and that in general we find it to be a workable plan, but that there are necessary revisions which we could suggest, or we would suggest on site plan review, which we consider to be imperative, and that let's see, what else? I think that would probably do it. We might mention just some of the areas in which with which concerns have been expressed are. And you'd say bulk of building, landscaping, views of neighbors.
Existing trees at the back corner.
Saving existing trees. Anything else?
So I just want to clarify. If we say that we think these waivers are appropriate, we're saying the setback, the variance, excuse me, the setback and the use for office specific, mixed use. But that doesn't preclude us from
conditioning anything else on the site. Is that correct?
That's what we're taking Mr. Corcoran has having represented.
Okay. So that means to the neighbors.
Tonight we're agreeing to 10 feet in use.
So just for the neighbors' benefit, because it's hard for me to follow some of the jargon, never mind people who don't do this all the time.
12 feet, right?
6 feet.
12 feet.
6, yeah.
6 feet from the canopy.
That's the setback. The setback is the closest piece of the building.
Supposed to be 10 feet.
6 feet. It's supposed to be
Supposed to be 20.
Supposed to be 20.
Supposed to be
So we're
20.
agreeing to a 14-foot variance.
But if
No,
you-
we're agreeing to a 8-foot. It's 12 feet off the thing except for the
20
front
feet
porch.
off the front lot line is the required setback, and that front porch itself would have to be 20 feet if that were...
I understand that, but it's 6 feet.
Correct.
But the rest of the building's 12 feet.
Correct.
But all the zoning board is going to say is...
Well, no, we want the zoning board to say 12 feet except for the porch.
That's not true, because that won't solve...
That won't solve.
That won't solve Cheryl's problem.
Well, then what,
wanna
I
say
don't,
6
you know,
feet.
we don't want the whole building within 6 feet of the
No, we
sidewalk.
don't want the whole thing.
But we have site plan
But
approval, right?
my understanding is that when we have site plan approval, like you're saying,
I'm
that we still have flexibility to say, here's, you come back to us, take with a solution to some of the issues that we've had.
Right.
But I would say that putting the whole building 6 feet away wouldn't be that. I think that would be a mischaracterization of what you presented here, right? So, I mean, that's where you say...
But the variance is the variance. If they say you can have a 6...
They can get a variance and flip the property, and that representation is not worth anything to you anymore. If you don't want a 6-foot variance, you better be aware of that, because once you say 6 feet, it's 6 feet.
But that was my question. So it's a 6-foot variance with site plan approval, so...
Variance.
But, yes, excuse me. But this board could never issue a site plan approval. So
Why
they-
not?
What?
Why not?
Well, that's what I'm asking. Do we have to issue a site plan approval?
More or less, yeah.
Even if they come back with a
Even if
building
we,
that's 6
even if
feet
we
off the
say
entire...
this stinks, we still have to, do the best we can.
So they say 12 feet from building, 6 feet from edge of canopy over front door. So that's what the variance they're asking for. So I don't think that allows you to bring the building to within 6 feet of the property line then.
Well, you don't want to do that, do you?
No, I
No,
don't. But I'm
she's
saying
just
it's- the protection should be there already is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Well, here's a concern. The variance that will be granted will be to the nearest point of the building to the lot line. That's how a variance is granted.
But then this language is not going to be something
No,
that's
I'm
in the variance
describing
language.
here, if we didn't do the canopy, the variance would be 12 feet, because we'd just be building the building. I can't guesstimate tonight, and without an architect doing some sort of adjustment to say whether the building itself would move to 10 feet or 8 feet, but the canopy would remain at 6 feet. I mean,
I guess the concern would be
How we
that
get
people are concerned about the bulk of the building since it's long and narrow. So if it moved closer to the street, the whole thing at 78 feet long, then that would be a worse situation. So we're just trying to make sure that we're not putting in to somebody, to your point, Brian, about if the property were to sell for whatever reason, could somebody come in then and put that in there without having, and we couldn't say no, right, with the site plan approval?
I'm not sure how much the Historic Commission chair was articulated about when you take that turn, how you're going to look at that building. I'm not sure how a step back on that or a step out onto this towards Adams Street is going to alleviate his concerns or what he was articulating. I think the best we could do is with facade treatments, different colors and different materials like you had talked about. To step a building 3 or 4 feet one way or the other isn't going to solve his issue. He'll be in here saying the same thing. I spent a couple of months with them. They didn't listen to anything that we had to say about architecture or maintaining that building or anything like that, and it's going to be the same thing. So for us to go through this, just to go through an exercise and not satisfy people, again, the same few people are going to be back. I think we have this building positioned where it should be. The neighbors want this building away from them as much as they can. Mr. Jubenville is very happy with the proposal, so we've satisfied the abutters, and that's what this is about.
And the other piece to that is
Are you,
it needs to be...
wait a minute, are you taking any big trees down?
It all depends on what I have to do with that barn, Alex. And it seems like trees come up a lot when I come to this board. And, you know,
trees are what
they're an
we
issue.
specialize in.
I should have got rid of them before I came here. But the thing is, those trees, depending on that barn has a basement. And when you disturb the root zone, it's going. And those things are up against that barn pretty close, and I'm not going to get into any extensive saving of those type of trees. There's no branches on them anyway. They're up, the branches are way up off those, up by the roof line, so.
But the neighbors like them.
I understand that, but when the barn goes, they're going to be, with those trees standing, they're going to be looking right out at the same side that they're talking about right now. Those trees aren't going to help them. Just go back there and look at them, you know?
But that's not what they want.
I understand. But you can't have everything.
The new canopy may actually, a newer canopy, lower canopy may actually be preferred, because I actually hear what you're saying on that point.
You've asked us to,
Well,
you've asked us to suggest some trees that might be planted. Plantings, we'll evaluate the nature of plantings that can be made along that fence line that may be faster growing than arborvitae that could fill in. that might be helpful.
arborvitaes are, I'm not going to, don't think
Hemlocks
they'll
is-
solve the problem.
At the end of the day, taking an imperfect situation and we're modifying it to another imperfect situation. This is not going to, we're not going to arrive at a perfect outcome.
Yeah, but the variance process says you have to get as near perfect as you can.
And we are.
Even with those trees out, I think we could find the right type of planting to alleviate their concerns, Alex. But I don't agree with trying to maintain trees up against that barn. I'm not
But
inclined to go with that.
you should try.
Yeah.
In my view. But, okay, so what do you think?
I mean, the reason I'm willing to, consider the setback is because I was getting some sense from Cheryl that, we could really do justice to the, historic respect of the area. So for that variance, that's significant. You're supposed to have 20 feet, and we're willing to go to 12 or 6 for a portion of it. But the reason I'm willing to give there is because I want some commitment back that there's going to be some gesture and efforts made toward the open space and the historic preservation of the area. So that's how I can do that. And then the mixed use, I mean, I was impressed that you got a number of neighbors in. I do hear your concerns about traffic, and I would love to mitigate that somehow, but I don't know that we can put that on one property owner. And at the East Milton Neighborhood Association meeting, I was there, and I got the sense that the East Milton Neighborhood Association generally was understanding of going toward mixed use. Generally, if you came in and there was no neighborhood support for mixed use, shifting from residential to mixed use, I would have a problem. But you've gone to some great lengths, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the neighbors coming out and advocating for themselves and speaking on that. So I just feel like the little sticky point here is just getting some historic conservation in, and you were talking about facades, and you were talking about architecture. I mean, if we can't do what Steve wants, which is flip the whole building, then I'm willing to do that. So does that get us anywhere, Alex? Does that help? You've heard from all of us now.
It's difficult because people say that you should have prepackaged something to send off to the Board of Appeals, but each one of these situations is different, and you've got to say something different. And I mean, this situation has never come up. Never come up. So I think that we can say we support this in concept with a 12-foot setback and a 6-foot porch setback with architectural adjustments and planting suitable to meet the character of the areas and the needs of the neighbors. And
So with that, one other thought, as far as those variances and setbacks, instead of having that small kind of element that's coming out to 6 feet, considers that to be something bigger, more like a porch, and then changing the proportion. So instead of having two bigger things on the sides and a small thing in the middle, where the thing in the middle was the thing that you had before historically, make the thing in the middle a bigger element and make two smaller things on the side.
Sure.
And have the porch do some of that work for you.
Sure. That's a nice...
And then the other things in terms of color and sizes and windows, all of those things, you know, I think really we'll take, you know, a little bit of study on that and what's the right proportion, historic proportions for those.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So with that.
all right. So Lauren, you're going to try and write this up with...
This is a public hearing. Do you want me to close it? Do we need to do that?
Is this a public hearing? It is, but of course, it's not a real public hearing.
Fair enough.
This is pre-application.
So, but let's vote to close it.
So I vote to close the informal public hearing.
All right, okay, all in favor?
Aye. I second.
And that, Lauren, you get to write something up and see what the board thinks, and we'll get it over to the Board of Appeals. Okay, and let's vote on that.
So
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for your...
All right. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Okay, Brushwood, come on up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
And don't try and adjourn without dealing with the town clerk's contract.
I also have packages for you before you all leave.
Right. And if you leave, you're not going to get one.
Bye.
All right, go.
This is David Udy. I represent the Condominium Trust. This is the third hearing where we're waiting for an update to see if the developer has followed your order to hire the relative peer review experts that you deem necessary. We haven't heard anything that anyone's been hired or done anything, and we're eager to see what's going on.
Okay, Bill, if you can't report, then I don't know who can.
When this board sent out their letter back in August, within 2 days, Mr. McKenna's attorney had written back to Joe Prundeck. I forwarded you the letter that went from Attorney Bernansky to Joe Prundeck. It stated who his people were, and it also stated in there that you also stated in there that this was to be handled by Mr. Prundeck, which is why Attorney Bernansky responded directly to him. It was a letter that went directly to Joe. It didn't come to me. I got it the day I sent it to you. It had listed on it who the individuals were that McKenna wanted to use. Joe didn't say anything about it. He wanted to have this hearing before he moved ahead with anything else.
Now, last time we had some names, and we said, tell Pat to hire these people, and we said...
We gave that list to Pat, but at the same time, Pat had already given a list to Joe that these are the people he wanted to use through his lawyer. Joe wasn't doing anything until the meeting tonight.
We said you have to do our people. That's what we said.
You said that, but you had no idea that that other letter had already been out there. You said it because we did not know that there was any movement by McKenna or Bernansky.
I thought that we said that we would like to have a peer review at
We did.
And so I provided 3 names in follow-up email to Lauren on the landscape architects that I mentioned.
And I sent it all over to Joe, and Joe's like, we're not doing anything until this meeting tonight.
So I just, at the last meeting, we talked about 5 things that we were going to get done before this meeting. We were going to check on peer reviews. We were going to make sure they were going to be available. We were going to get estimates for their work.
We're going to hire.
We're going to share those with the.
Have him hire all these
So
different
none
people.
of those things happened.
None of those things happened. And there was a second component to it, and that was that McKenna said he was pulling off of the site until there was a safety issue resolved. All of it went back to Joe Prondak. I had given the same letter to Alex. I don't know that the rest of the board got it about the safety issue. I know I sent it to the rest of the board about the safety issue.
But Bill, excuse me one sec. I thought that what we were going to do with those names was get an idea of what the fee would be to do the peer review.
Yes.
And then, even if necessary, we would seek a reserve fund transfer from the warrant committee. That was the discussion that we had.
Yes.
And then we were talking about whether those funds could be recouped somehow, but at a minimum, we wanted to know what the costs would be to do the peer review. We had accepted that these people were already doing work, and it wasn't what we had asked for, but at a minimum, we wanted to check into the peer review.
And we wanted to know the expense and the availability so that we would have information tonight to make some decisions on what to do next.
And if people weren't available, we had backup names, so we wouldn't be this.
I mean, in fact, I spoke for the other work that I'm doing. I spoke with 2 of those landscape architects today, and I didn't even think to ask them if they had been contacted yet. I wish I would have talked to them about it.
And with respect, this doesn't make sense because your order says you guys, in black and white, have to pre-approve these people, and the basis for that was our distrust of McKenna hiring people that were proper because the people he's hired in the past presented you with fraudulent plans that weren't right. So you guys put in your order, I assume on the strength of that the planning board, not Joe Prondak, the planning board in black and white wants to know who these people are and pre-approve them.
But one thing, we did talk about that a lot, and I just want to put back out there that we also had a concern about the abutters. We're still having issues, and that if we insist on that we're going to lose the season, and that their impacts could be extended for many, many months longer. And in fact, there may be lawsuits over it, and it might be years longer, so that we dealt with this as a compromise situation where we would get it peer reviewed. I thought it was pretty clear after the last meeting that was the direction we were going in, and you even said that you supported that approach.
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I think we're saying the same thing.
Okay.
I think the people, we just want independent people to verify that what's being done on site is okay and right and proper. The drainage works. These are the trees that are necessary to repopulate what was there. A peer review, call it whatever you want, but that the planning board would know who those people were, pre-approve them, and then figure out a way to pay for it. And this is the 3rd meeting, and that's, I think, consistent with your original order from back in August. That's what you said. And with respect, I don't want to get on my soapbox again. This is the 3rd meeting where this guy was supposed to do this. I mean, there's a long history here of this guy ignoring you. And I know you want to close out this job and get it done and protect the abutters, but he does not do what you tell him to do. The only thing, in my opinion, respectfully, that developers listen to are things that impact them financially. That's when they wake up and say, oh my gosh, I have to actually listen to these people who are volunteering their time at 10 o'clock at night to sort out these issues and deal with this. And, how many more mulligans does he get to do that before he gets told to stop working and do what you tell him to do?
Okay, so
I'll get off my soapbox, but I've said this every time I come here. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to, just for the record, keep saying it, and then I'll stop.
I just really want to get to resolution, and I thought we were making progress at the end of our discussion at our last meeting. So I'd like to suggest, Bill, Halverson is part of the Howard Stein Hudson team for the East Milton deck, from what I understand. I spoke to Bob Eulig, who's the president of Halverson, this week. I didn't talk to him about the peer review, but if they're already going to be doing work in Milton, I'm sure he could give you a fee proposal in short order, and then you could follow up with the other couple if you want to. But, I mean, we could have that probably tomorrow or the next day.
But then we have to meet again.
No, I'm thinking we have to do something in between, that Bill needs to get with Alex in between. I agree that...
I mean, it's unacceptable. We've had the same conversation multiple meetings in a row. I am really furious that we keep coming to the meetings and getting nowhere. And I mean, I don't blame you at all for getting upset, and I don't blame the neighbors for being upset. I'm very upset. I don't dedicate my time to this to sit here and just be ignored every 2 weeks, and that's what's been happening, and I don't understand. I don't understand what Joe Prondak has to do with our conversation last time about peer review, that we've actually had 3 or 4 or 5 meetings in a row. I just don't understand how that has anything to do with Joe Prondak. And I'm very frustrated.
For some reason, this isn't coming up, but what you sent to him said the foregoing requirements of an interim condition for amended site plan approval and failure of Brush Hill Mansions LLC to comply with these requirements shall constitute a material breach of the site plan approval. The building commissioner is requested to report to the board regarding the compliance with this interim condition. Once the necessary consultant reports have been received, a final amended site plan approval will be issued. Compliance with that final amended site plan approval will be necessary until the development can be considered complete and available for occupancy.
But what does that have to do with our conversation last time we were here about this board wanting to do a peer review and seeking out consultants?
Well, Bill did send out an email from the Department of Public Works showing pictures of the item to be peer reviewed, saying that you could see the fabric and
I don't even know if that's good enough for the site anymore, because the site's been totally altered from how it was designed. That's what we need peer reviewed.
Well,
I agree. At least that was the first step. We saw the fabric was.
Well, I mean, apparently the Department of Public Works signed off on that drainage system.
According to the original design, which has been not executed.
I'm sorry.
Well, but okay, I mean, but the design for the drainage system has been executed as designed. Right? You're suggesting that we need an engineer to look and determine if it's, but that's the peer review part of it. We also need a surveyor and a landscape architect to do a plan so we know what we're going to do about the site. And the other thing that we mentioned last time that we said that we would act on this time if it hadn't occurred is hydroseeding and stabilizing the site. Has it been hydroseeded?
I don't know. I haven't gone there to look. I gave them the
okay, but
they had to do it the next day.
Compliance here, it has not been hydroseeded.
Okay, we said that if it hasn't been hydroseeded, we're going to do something.
We can't do anything.
Right.
Well, I understand that, but we can presumably revoke the site plan approval.
We have no other choice. I don't know what else we do at this point.
But that...
drastic measure, but...
well, it guarantees litigation also.
I agree. We've been trying to avoid it.
I mean, I think the sensitivity around time to try to resolve this in a timely fashion is, I mean, out the window at this point.
Well, I mean, you know, a certified letter to Pat would have been in order rather than a telephone call.
And, you know, I think documentation of the type of people that we were looking for and how much it was going to cost and when they were available, all of the things we discussed last week would have helped to back that up.
If we revoke our site plan permit, is the association able to at least go in and stabilize the site on their own?
No, of course not. They can't do anything.
So nothing, everything just stops?
Yeah.
Okay. No, not even hydroseeding?
I don't see how you can do it.
And the concern that I have is the non-association direct abutters who are directly impacted.
Right, all these innocent parties who have nothing to do with this now.
I totally agree.
That's the stopping the work and having it be in litigation. That's what concerns me about that
But we've
method.
been trying to not stop the work and nothing's happening anyway.
Well, it does seem to me that our use of certified mail has been really quite lacking.
Yeah.
And I would also like to request, Lauren, when you're making your list, that things be date stamped when they're submitted, because this letter from the lawyer was not.
Well, I think that we have to determine if the SWPPP has been complied with.
I think the answer is partially.
Well, if it hasn't been complied with, Joe Prondak has a plan that he can enforce because it requires stabilization. So I can be in touch with Joe and say we want stabilization of the site.
When you say we can enforce it, meaning that we can, meaning Milton, town of Milton can enforce it, meaning we can send our DPW in to enforce?
I believe Joe has authority to enforce the SWPPP, doesn't he, Bill?
I'm just asking what enforcement means.
Yeah.
Does that mean we can send DPW in to stabilize the site? And I didn't think so. We can't
So
go
what
on
does that
private
mean?
property.
We
So it
can
just means
issue-
we send them an order and say, do it?
Or cease and desist or something.
Well, I mean, but getting an order from the building, getting an order from us is different. And we haven't, we sent out the interim order some time ago, and we haven't gotten compliance, but we haven't been a very good regulatory body, and that we haven't followed up adequately. And I don't see that it's, I don't know how to type, I don't see it's my job to be our enforcement officer.
Can I ask you another, you may not know the answer to this. If the building commissioner issues an order that's not followed, does that constitute a civil offense, or is it just another malfeasance that we have to deal with?
It definitely is
Or is it a criminal defense? I meant to say criminal. I meant to say criminal. It's definitely civil. Is it a criminal defense? Does it go to misdemeanor status or anything along
I don't
those
think
lines?
it's criminal. I think it's civil.
Does it go to criminal?
I think it's civil.
It's just civil. Okay. That's what I figured.
But he can go to district court and enforce it.
Him stopping his building permits has more power over everything he's doing, because for as much as he's leaving the site, he may be doing the building. If Joe puts a stop work on the building, now you've got his attention.
Your town planner is right. It's as simple as that. And I don't know what kind of communication you have with Joe Prondak, but if you tell him, look, give him the history here of the repeated ignoring of what you've told, and say, can you please issue a stop work order till these 4 things are done? Look, you can ask your own town council and you can make up your own mind, but I think there's quite a record here of you guys being ignored, and I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying that. And I've spoken with Joe Prondak. He seems like a reasonable, level-headed guy. If you speak with him and say he's ignored us for the past however many months, we want these 4 things done before he does what he's supposed to do. He's in violation of our order. There's no wiggle room. It's a violation. He's not done what you told him to do. Please revoke the building permit until he does it. Joe Prondak has already done that in one case.
Yes.
In this case, he's already told him, and he written a letter to him at our insistence when we provided him with the evidence, that there was no tree protection on site. So we said, you have to revoke the building permit to give a stop work order until you put tree protection. And oh, by the way, the developer didn't stop work. He just went ahead and kept working, didn't blew Joe Prondak off. So the only way you're truly going to get, in my opinion, this is my opinion, the developer's attention, is revoke his ability to do work on site and back it up by suing him when he doesn't listen to you, because that's what's going to happen.
Part of what's missing here is, yes, you said in your amendment that the planning board shall approve the choice of surveyor, drainage engineer, and landscape architect as consultants, and they will require their attendance in at least one meeting. The applicant shall be responsible to pay the cost. McKenna gave the amendment to his lawyer. His lawyer responded and sent something to Joe. Joe got it and didn't do anything with it. He thought I got a copy. I didn't get a copy of it. He gave me a copy last Friday, and I gave it to you. It listed who he wanted to have for his people.
And they weren't independent. They were the
people that he has for his project. But that's not what you said in the amendment. The amendment said that he was supposed to respond to the building inspector. So that's what the lawyer did. He responded to the building inspector. And the building inspector didn't, I did not have a conversation with him over this stuff until I was trying to figure out how are we getting people for a peer review. Joe's like, stop on the peer review. We have to figure out where this is going next. He goes, that's what the meeting on Thursday's for.
But with respect, they can't hire anyone until you approve them. That's what your order says. It's plain English. I mean, come on, it's plain English. You're supposed to approve them.
That's right.
And it was supposed to be an
So he can send all the letters to Joe
peer
Prondak he wants, but he still's got to bring them here for your approval. This is plain English.
So the question is, I'm sorry, Danny, go ahead.
Well, it's just that was the piece I was trying to say in the process. If you or Joe had conveyed to Alex that you were stopping, well, we thought this was happening, but if you or Joe had mentioned this to Alex, we're stopping for XYZ, Alex would have been able to say, do not stop for whatever reason. Do you know what I mean? That's the hole in the process, one of the holes. Do you see what I'm saying, Bill?
I do. But that's why I sent the letter
We saw the letter,
to the board.
but we all assumed, we saw that letter, but we still assumed you were going to continue with our last discussion.
May I just now, with respect to the letter, do we know whether these consultants have actually done any work? And if they haven't done any work, then should we just go ahead and
Who
get
cares
it?
if they've done any work? Just pull them.
They're the original.
Who cares?
I care in the sense that we...
The plan that got us into trouble in the first place, that stamped.
This whole situation is embarrassing.
Pull the permit, stabilize the site, follow the original order. That's where I am right now.
Yes.
Well, you can't pull
Who's stabilizing the site?
You can pull the building. You
Stabilize
can pull the building permit, is what I meant by that. Tell Prondak to pull the building permit until the site is stabilized, and then follow the order for the rest of this.
Thing, and we all have to speak when we want to
That's
speak.
easy enough to
I'm guilty
to do.
too. I guess...
Stopping work is, I'm sorry, because it's going to make a lot of people suffer.
That's my concern about stopping work.
Stop the inside building. We're saying
gonna
stop
stabilize it,
building, stop building and stabilize. Shift your focus away from the inside of the building, because that can happen in the winter.
He's not going to stabilize the site. He's not going to stabilize, even if you tell him to stabilize this, he's not going to do it.
He hasn't stabilized
the only thing that might get him to do it is pulling his building permit. That's the only recourse we have right now.
And we still don't.
Certainly telling him to do it didn't achieve anything.
But we also don't have a mechanism in place for any of the peer reviews, so we don't even know if his idea of stabilizing the site is actually going to accomplish what we hope it does.
I don't know what you mean by stabilizing the site. Seeding it, or planting it, or doing other kind of drainage work until somebody looks at it and tells us. So
that's the
I
thing.
mean, you
That's
don't know
why
if it's
I'm so
gonna work.
upset.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. That I'm supporting what you're saying.
Yes,
saying,
no, I know.
I don't know,
I know.
how we can just say stabilize it when we don't know what stabilize it means.
So my proposal would be that you go back to him, you pull his building permit until he follows the order we gave him. As part of solving for that order, he needs to work with the landscape architect that we deem relevant to come up with a stabilization plan and stabilize it. period. Enough with his guys.
I think we just want it hydro-seeded. I don't think we want elaborate...
Attest to that, I don't know.
Elaborate retaining walls.
Oh, I agree with that.
No, I definitely think we want it hydro-seeded.
SWPP should be complied with.
When we left here last time, I told him that night to hydroseed the site. I told him about 5 times, and still, I don't know that it is or isn't.
It's not.
Do it.
So the question then is, somebody said earlier, and I'm sorry, I forgot who said it, that ultimately it's the association's responsibility, that they are responsible for the special permit. So is the association willing to take on stabilizing the site by doing the hydro seeding? And working it out then with the developer? I mean, because ultimately that's what we're looking at, right?
Well, we can work it out with the developer. We've got to...
No, we tell the developer to stop work while he goes away. Does that mean the association
No, my
is
point is
responsible to
the
do the
developer's a
stabilization?
long way from getting a CO. So we can figure out how to get the condo association reimbursed as part of whatever the workout is with what's going to happen to fix what's been done up there.
Well, unless his lawyer starts lawyering, and then we'll just have...
That's coming anyway.
What?
Years of litigation, right? I mean,
Well, that's right. I mean, then the people who are suffering now will have many years to suffer.
And with respect, I'm not your town council, obviously, but your orders have been clear. You told him what to do. The building commissioner has found in letters violations of the orders that have been done. Trees were clear cut. There was no tree protection plan in place. He admits his plans were wrong. I mean, he can bring whatever litigation he wants, but it seems pretty clear cut, no pun intended, what has occurred here. My client has told me that, if the work is stopped, so we can do the requisite peer review that this board deems by independent people that need to happen, we'll take responsibility for hydroseeding the site, because no one else is doing it. But we just want what's there to be peer reviewed. How many times can we ask the guy? How many different ways?
So can we have another memo of sort come from either us or from Joe that says, give a date final that hydro seeding has to be in place? If it's not, the building permit's pulled, that the homeowners association will do the hydro seeding, and they won't go any further in their construction of the building until the things that have been demanded of them are received by the planning board?
I don't understand why we wouldn't pull his permit tonight.
I think you pull the permit tonight.
Okay. Well, that's Joe, right?
Nothing moves until this hydroseeded.
yeah, that's assuming that.
Nothing moves until it's hydroseeded and that order is complied.
Well, and that's right. I mean, nothing, pull the permit and then be here to discuss the order. Why isn't he here tonight? Because he didn't want to come.
You got the same email I got. I sent it to you, that until he wanted to meet.
At the police station.
There you go.
Well, maybe we're going to have to meet at the police station.
Can we not just have a police officer here?
What?
Can we just not have a police officer here? I guess we're going to not allow that.
Well, we would have to pay for them.
Make any demands, frankly.
Well, in any event, I think a stop work order until it's hydroseeded, and that we really need to meet. We really need compliance with our order. These are the people who we want hired. We've got their names, and
Should Bill and Lauren continue with the phone calls to find out who's available for the?
I think phone calls are.
No, she's saying on the peer review people, yes.
Should Bill and Lauren, even though Joe said to stop calling, could we suggest please don't stop calling?
It's going to be hard to really estimate what the task is, but no, we can do it. We can do it. We'll do that.
Thank you.
on the landscape, we have the people on the civil. Did you say we were going to talk to the
BSC.
people who are doing the?
BSC.
Yeah.
But you've got to remember, once we get these plans, then we have some nice plans, then Pat has to actually construct according to the plans. That's another potential issue, but we'll see what happens.
He's going to want occupancy permits, so my sense was he'll do it.
Somebody's going to want to sell these houses he's built.
Well, I hear you. But a lot of developers dig in and the results are never good. So we'll see what we can do. We will say to Joe, I believe that the SWPPP requires hydroseeding.
It does. It also requires a monthly inspection, which doesn't get done.
Right, and hay bales, and in other words, there's a fair amount
That's
of...
not Joe.
Who is that?
Because it's private property, that's where it...
But we don't know who it is?
I don't know if it's our engineer looked at it, which is why they took the pictures that I sent to the board earlier. They show that how the system was, how it was built. They showed the pieces to it, and that's why they signed off. The day after the meeting, following up on your comments, I actually went back and asked Chase for a copy of how the system got signed off. He's been checking on it. He goes, we don't have a written system. We have a series of checks. And so far, everybody has said that, yes, they have followed it. The strange part is, he said, it's on private property. I don't know how we're doing it, but we did it.
Bill, I have a question. If Joe Prondak pulls the building permit until such time as the SWPPP is complied with, argue that he probably does then have the enforcement right to go and check if the SWPPP has been complied with before he can reissue a building permit.
I bet he does.
So that's probably how I would tackle it.
All right, let's do that, just because it's an outstanding obligation that hasn't been complied with, which warrants and justifies ceasing the building permit.
And I would just respectfully request that the other component of that, to your point earlier, is that he has to do the peer review before things are turned on again, before he can start going. It's up to you, obviously, but yeah.
No, I mean, we will continue the push for someone to look at the drainage. I mean, it is more than I guess it's more than a peer review, because they have to go out and survey the site. So I mean, it's a whole new engineering study that we're asking
to
for.
Recalculate it.
Which okay, I mean, that's what we're asking for. We're asking for them to re-engineer the thing because of the existing conditions being different from the conditions shown on the, so we really need that survey before we can hire an engineer.
Which I think is what we talked about last time.
What?
That's what we talked about last time, is finding somebody to survey the site.
Talking about it again.
That's why I mean, I have a family, I have a job, I have things I need to do in life, and to come here every 2 weeks and discuss.
This is just a little bit of this meeting, and this is what happens when you have conflicts.
I get it.
That you often sit around rehashing the same thing time and time again, where there is no obvious remedy.
There was a plan of attack for how to move forward that didn't get carried out. This isn't a conflict amongst us. This is, our plan did not get followed. And so I think we all have a right to be frustrated. I mean, should we all divvy up the peer review people and start making the calls ourselves? Is that the only way it's going to get accomplished?
Well, no, if he doesn't pay for it, it's not going to get
But
accomplished.
we had a plan to figure out the next step was going to be figure out what we need to do, how much it was going to
I
cost.
think we just did figure out the next step.
A new plan this week, though. Which
and you know, this is...
It's the same
we've
plan,
been-
it's
we've
just
been-
acknowledging it
we've
didn't get
been-
done.
Look, we've been at Brushwood for 30 minutes, and we've had a lot of other things that we've discussed this evening. It's not as though we're spending all our time about Brushwood. Brushwood is an exceedingly difficult situation because we have a developer hired by the condo association to do a job who has not done the job well.
I know, which is why we've been talking about how we're going to move forward from here.
And you have suggestions beyond what we've already suggested.
All we have to do is review the last 2 meeting tapes, and there are the suggestions. My suggestion is, let's advance those ideas. Which everybody seemed to be, we all were in agreement on what to do next. I would just like us to do them. Gather some information on peer review. It's a small baby step forward, but it'll advance our conversation.
It's actually a new engineering study of the project.
But we don't know if we need
I
that.
don't know if that's true, if it's a new study, or if someone can make a judgment based on walking the site, looking at the original design, and saying, yes, it warrants a further study, or no, it doesn't. Because we're not in a position to do that. We're not knowledgeable.
Is that what we're after?
I'll have somebody,
that's the first
I'll
step,
have the
I think.
engineer there next week, whether, if it can't be BSC, I'll get somebody else. I'll get another person from a list from Chase. But we'll get another person, and we'll be there the first part of next week.
And then I would do the same with Halverson. Say, can you walk the site with me? Look at the site plan. Look at the topo on here. How far off do you think it is? You know, what do you think it'll take if you had to generate a new plan? Who do you think could survey it? What would it cost?
But Cheryl,
These guys will do that.
But to April's point, okay?
You know we've already talked about it.
No, that's not what I was going to say. That's not what I was going to say. We have an existing order. Why rehash it? Let's say, add to our order, which is basically, you haven't done anything, so now you've got to stabilize the site and make sure you're in compliance with the SWPP. That is a further requirement for you getting your building permit back. We're pulling your building permit. You're going to stabilize in accordance with SWPP, and you're going to do what that order says, or no more hammers. Because why recreate the order? We've got an order.
Well, we did write the order, but...
So the question...
Just bear in mind that that's an unusual order.
This is an unusual situation.
Well, it may be, but there needs to be a legal basis for everything we do. And so just keep that in mind. And you know, once we get all the stuff in that order, once they do it, we're going to have a plan, and he's then going to have to build it. Because
I agree, and that's a great position to be in.
It is not a great position to be in.
Why? Well, how else are we going to know what he's going to build? How do we even issue a CO on the site at this point?
We don't issue any of these things.
We meaning Milton, Alex. I know we don't.
We don't stop work order either. We have exceedingly limited
we can pull our site plan approval
here.
at this point. That's about it, right? We can pull our site plan approval or declare a breach of it. That's about it.
We can declare a breach, but I'm not sure that means anything. Unless the enforcement officer agrees. So, you know, this is a tricky situation, and we don't have that many.
Well, the building inspector has asked us for our advice.
And we're going to give it to him.
And we're trying to give it to him. So when I say we, you should hear it as Milton as opposed to the planning board, because I understand we have to be acting in accordance with our own jurisdiction.
Right.
So I'm trying to, in being hot with my temper right now, and it's late. I'm suggesting that we should be advising the building inspector.
We're either going to adjourn or we're going to go for another 10 minutes.
10 minutes. I make a motion to go for 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, but we do have, we have a plan to say, stabilize or stop work, and you've got 10 days to get, agree to these people or another stop work.
Sounds great.
Okay?
So that's what we're advising to Joe, because we can't do it ourselves.
So just a question about that. Since his attorney sent this to Joe on August 23rd, at least it's dated August 23rd, and he said, this is who I'm going to use, and presumably, let's say these people have done the work, do you really want to start over and have it take another 2 months if these people have done the work and we could have somebody review the work?
Well, let's assume they haven't done the work.
If they've
done the work, they'll probably let us know.
Would you mind just telling me who the people are? We don't know that we weren't given a copy of that letter.
People we discussed.
No, on that letter.
On this letter?
Did you not receive the letter?
No.
CEC.
It's like it just...
So CEC was the guy who prepared the plan on sheet 2 was showing the trees. That was wrong. That was a lie. That's a strong word, but that was inaccurate.
Completely inaccurate, yeah.
So that's the same guy, same firm.
All right, so what we had talked about the last meeting was if we go the route of this, then, and we are comfortable that hydro seeding is going to solve the downslope abutters problems with runoff until they come around to do some new work in the spring. And if we have a rainy spring, maybe it's late spring. My only concern about that approach is that there could be further damage to those abutters downslope. And they've been patient, they've come to a lot of meetings, and they've had significant impacts. And I understand there's impacts on the property to other people who've had utilities cut and all that, and I don't want to minimize those impacts. But they aren't a party to any of it. These people are just sort of innocent bystanders. And I just want to keep trying to advocate that we bear that in mind as we want to make sure these guys do what they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to follow this stuff. But sometimes you have to be practical.
Let's just tell them to make sure the SWPPP is complied with, because that would be more than hydro seeding.
Okay, fine.
Would be Hayfields and the whole shooting match.
But then we don't need the peer review outreach phone calls then at this point.
Well, no,
it's a different approach.
Eventually.
No, because you're going to ask them to do the design work. It's not peer review.
Design work, it's not peer review.
And we don't know what the design work is yet.
Well, why not? No, we need the survey, and we need the landscape architect to get to work.
Yep.
That's correct.
And then we can, are you suggesting that checking on the drainage is something that can be done, but, and that's going to happen. The drainage is going to happen. You're going to have an engineer out there.
Have an engineer go out and look at the site and see that it's what's happening.
So SWPPP and
I'll ask
and get this thing surveyed so the landscape architect can go to work.
I'll ask the engineer to take a look at the stormwater plan and see where the deficiencies are,
right,
which will address Cheryl's issues.
Right. Okay. So that's what we're going to do, right? Okay. We've got a grudging agreement. Everyone agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we're going to do.
Thank you, Alex.
That's it.
staying late.
And we're going to continue this hearing until when? Next time.
Thank you.
Unless you really, it's just not fair, is it? But
I'm a night owl anyway, so it's
Get the last meeting.
And I'm on the planning board. I had a meeting last night that went till 10:30 at night. So
all right.
I know the drill.
We're going to go to 10:10.
All right, so you have one more item on your agenda?
Yeah. So we're continuing it until when?
12th.
The 12th. At what time, Phil?
At old business.
8 o'clock.
Okay.
8 o'clock.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
It's so continued.
Thank you.
Okay, now, $9,900 for this codification plan. And I think it's money well spent, even if at the end of the day, the result is what I expect it will be.
Well, I read Susan Galvin's email where she had received the feedback from a lot of other people. I didn't actually read the proposal itself.
I went to Easton today, and I talked to the planning director and the town clerk. And Easton has a number of problems because they didn't submit any of their zoning to the Attorney General for 10 years.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's bad. That was a bad.
But they have codified their zoning.
So they did exactly opposite of what we did.
They have codified, and they love it. And they say it's so easy, and it's just great. They just say it's wonderful. So I say,
let's go.
let's go.
There you go. Thank you,
$9,900,
Susan Galvin.
Point I would make that I would want the board to consider going forward on an annual basis, looking at the planning staff and all of us. Everyone cited the fact that they spent another $5,000 a year keeping up with it. So I think we should make sure that we're thinking about that as we're planning our budget going forward, that this is an ongoing expense. This isn't something we're doing
Susan
one
said,
time.
I thought I heard Susan say she would build that expense into her budget moving forward.
Perfect, good.
She does, because it's not just the zoning.
It's general as well.
It's general.
Right.
It's Board of Health, which Alex found the piece in there that the Board of Health
I took it out.
Yeah, they glommed theirs onto us.
All right, great, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have to vote to let me sign the contract and to authorize expenditure of $9,900 from our budget, from our general fund,
So moved.
or wherever that money is. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now,
Motion to adjourn.
all in favor?
Aye.
And so we're adjourned.
Ta-da.